Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Danny Reeves, and I'm going to tell you about the worst damn day of my life. Well, actually, it was 3 days that nearly broke me, but you get the idea. This happened back in October 2008, right when the whole economy was going to shit and everybody was losing their houses and jobs. Me? I'd already lost mine the year before. Budget cuts hit the Forest Service hard, and guys like me with 15 years under their belts suddenly found ourselves on the street. But that's not why I'm telling you this story. I'm telling you because some things need to be said, and what happened out there in the Olympic Peninsula. Hell, it changed everything I thought I knew about people, about what we're capable of when we get pushed too far. See, after I lost my ranger job, I started doing private search and rescue work. Turns out when you've spent half your life in the woods, people will pay good money for your skills when their loved ones go missing. And I'd gotten pretty good at finding people, had this knack for reading signs that others missed, tracking footprints that seemed invisible to everyone else. My old partner used to joke that I could track a ghost through a thunderstorm. So when the Chens called me up on that Tuesday morning, I could hear the desperation crack in their voices before they even finished explaining the situation. Mrs. Chen was crying so hard she could barely get the words out, and her husband kept taking the phone, his English getting more broken the more upset he got. Their daughter Sarah, 26 years old, graduate student in marine biology at UW, had been missing for 3 days in the Olympic National Park. "She good girl," Mr. Chen kept saying. "Study hard, always call home. Something wrong, Mr. Reeves. Something very wrong." What really got to me was hearing about Sarah's research project. She was out there collecting data on old-growth forest ecosystems. Something about how the trees communicate through their root systems. Smart as hell, according to her parents, and careful too. She'd grown up hiking with her dad, knew how to handle herself in the woods. This wasn't some college kid who'd wandered off a trail. This was someone who understood the forest. But 3 days without contact? In October, with the temperatures dropping into the 30s at night? That's when careful doesn't matter anymore. That's when time starts running out fast. I told the Chens I'd head up there that afternoon, and Mrs. Chen grabbed my hand through the phone. If that makes any sense. You know what I mean. That desperation where someone's reaching for any hope they can find. "You bring her home," she whispered. "Please. She all we have." Turns out Sarah wasn't all they had. There was a younger brother, Kevin, 17 years old and supposed to be focusing on college applications. But when I met the family that day before heading up to the park, that kid looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Kept staring at his phone like Sarah might text him any second. "She promised she'd help me with my essay," he said, and his voice cracked. "For Berkeley. She said we'd work on it when she got back." The Chens had a restaurant in Seattle's International District, one of those family places where they worked 16-hour days so their kids could get educated and have better lives. Looking at the pictures of Sarah they showed me, I could see why they were so proud. Graduation photos, science fair ribbons, that confident smile of someone who knew exactly where she was going in life. But what struck me most was this one picture from the previous Christmas. Sarah hugging her little brother, both of them laughing at something off camera. You could see how much they meant to each other, how much this whole family depended on each other. And now their bright, careful, smart daughter was somewhere out there in 40,000 acres of wilderness. And every hour that passed made it less likely I'd bring her home alive. I loaded up my truck that afternoon. 2008 this was, so my GPS was one of those clunky Garmin units. And my phone was a first-generation iPhone that barely worked once you got away from cell towers. But I had my compass, my maps, my first aid kit, and 15 years of experience reading the forest like other people read books. The drive up to Olympic took about 3 hours, and I spent most of it thinking about the case. Park rangers had already done a basic search of Sarah's last known location, the Kinnow River area, where she'd been collecting samples near the old-growth groves. They'd found her campsite intact, which was both good and bad news. Good because it meant she hadn't been swept away by the river or attacked by a bear. Bad because it meant she'd left voluntarily, and that opened up a whole different set of possibilities. I got to the ranger station just as the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything orange and gold. Beautiful country, but October in the Olympics is no joke. By 6 p.m. it's pitch black, and the temperature drops fast. If Sarah was injured and couldn't make it back to her camp, "You the private investigator?" The ranger on duty was a young woman, maybe 25, with that keen look that comes from spending your days watching for trouble in the woods. "Search and rescue," I corrected. "Danny Reeves used to work for the Forest Service before the cutbacks." She nodded. Everybody knew about the budget problems. "I'm Jessica Martinez. We've been over Sarah's campsite twice, and we've got search teams covering a 5-mile radius. But with this weather moving in..." She didn't have to finish. The forecast was calling for freezing rain that night, and a storm system that would make any serious search impossible for the next 2 days. If Sarah was hurt and exposed, she wouldn't survive it. "Show me everything," I said. Sarah's campsite was about 2 miles down a fire road, then another mile on foot through dense forest. Even with my flashlight, I could tell this was going to be tricky terrain in the dark. But as we hiked in, I started noticing things that made me feel better about Sarah's chances. Her camp was set up perfectly, tent positioned to stay dry, food properly stored away from animals, equipment organized like someone who knew what she was doing. This wasn't some amateur who'd panicked and run off into the woods. "We found her field notebook," Jessica said, handing me a waterproof case. "Last entry was 3 days ago, around noon. She was planning to collect samples from a grove about half a mile north of here." I read through Sarah's notes by flashlight. Her handwriting was precise, scientific, pH levels, soil composition, tree measurements. But the last entry was different. More excited. "Found something unusual about 500 meters north-northeast of camp. Grove of old cedars with unusual growth patterns. Trees seem to have been deliberately cultivated rather than growing naturally. Some show signs of human modification decades old. Worth investigating further." That's when I knew we were dealing with something more complicated than a simple lost hiker. "You guys searched that grove she mentioned?" I asked Jessica. "Couldn't find it. We searched north of the camp in a grid pattern, but there's no grove matching her description within a mile of here." I looked at the notebook again, then at my compass. North-northeast, 500 meters. If Sarah was as careful as her notes suggested, she wouldn't have been wrong about distance or direction, which meant either the grove was hidden somehow or... "I'm gonna head out there first thing tomorrow," I told Jessica, "soon as there's enough light to track." That night I slept in my truck, parked as close to the trailhead as I could get. But I didn't sleep much. Kept thinking about Mrs. Chen's voice, about Kevin staring at his phone, about Sarah's excited note about finding something unusual. In my experience, when people go missing in the woods, unusual is never a good thing. I was up before dawn, hiking into Sarah's camp by first light. The air was cold enough that my breath steamed, and frost covered everything like broken glass. Beautiful and deadly. That's October in the mountains. Sarah's campsite looked different in daylight. More organized, but also more isolated. You couldn't see or hear the fire road from here, couldn't see any other campsites. If someone wanted privacy for whatever they were doing, this would be a good spot. I started tracking from her tent, looking for any sign of which direction she'd gone. Most people would have missed it, but I've got this thing where I can spot tracks that are barely there. Crushed pine needles, disturbed moss, a scuff mark on a rock. Sarah had headed north-northeast just like her notebook said, but as I followed her trail I started noticing something strange. Her footprints were steady and confident for the first couple hundred meters. Then they changed. Started meandering like she was confused or searching for something. Then they stopped altogether. Not stopped like she'd turned around, stopped like she'd just vanished. I spent 2 hours going over every inch of ground in a 50-foot radius. Found a few more footprints, but they were scattered, random, like Sarah had been walking in circles. That's when I heard it, a sound that made my blood go cold. Someone was whistling, a tune I recognized from somewhere, drifting through the trees from the north. I followed the sound for maybe 10 minutes, moving as quiet as I could through the underbrush. The whistling would stop, then start again, always seeming to come from just ahead of me, leading me somewhere. And that's when I found the grove Sarah had written about. It was hidden in a natural depression, surrounded by dense undergrowth that made it invisible until you were right on top of it. But once you saw it, you understood immediately what had excited her. These weren't natural trees, they'd been planted in a perfect circle, their branches woven together overhead like a living ceiling. In the center was a cleared space maybe 20 feet across, covered with soft moss. It was beautiful, and it was wrong. I'd been in these woods for 15 years, and I'd never seen anything like this. The trees were old, maybe 60, 70 years, which meant someone had planted them back in the 40s or 50s. But why? And who? That's when I saw the first piece of Sarah's equipment. Her water sampling kit was sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the grove, arranged almost like it was on display. Clean, undamaged, but definitely hers. I recognized it from the photos her parents had shown me. My phone buzzed. Text message, somehow getting through even though I should have been out of cell range. "You're good at this. She was impressed by you too." Unknown number. My hand started shaking, and not from the cold. I called the number immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. No greeting, just dead air, then the beep. "I don't know who this is," I said into the phone. "But if you've got Sarah Chen, you need to let her go right now. Her family's worried sick, and there's people looking for her." I hung up and immediately called Jessica at the ranger station. "Martinez, it's Danny Reeves. I found the grove Sarah wrote about, and I found some of her equipment, but we've got a problem. I think someone's been watching me." "What do you mean?" I told her about the text message, about the way Sarah's water kit had been displayed like someone wanted me to find it. "Could be kids messing around," she said, but I could hear the concern in her voice. "No," I said. "This is something else. I need backup out here. I'll send a team, but it's going to be at least 2 hours to get to your location. Can you wait?" I looked around the grove again. More of Sarah's equipment was scattered around the edges. Her field notebook, some sample containers, a GPS unit. All of it arranged carefully, deliberately. "Yeah," I said. "I'll wait." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying, because my phone buzzed again. "If you want to find her alive, you need to keep playing. Follow the trail I've left you. And Danny, don't disappoint me." This time there was a photo attached. Sarah, very much alive, but tied to a chair in what looked like a cabin. She was looking directly at the camera, and I could see the fear in her eyes, but also something else. Defiance. This was a fighter. "You have 24 hours. The game starts now." I stared at that photo for a long time, my heart hammering in my chest. Whoever had Sarah knew who I was, knew I was tracking her, which meant they'd been watching me from the moment I'd arrived. But it also meant Sarah was alive, and that gave me something to work with. I called Jessica back and told her about the photo. "We need to call FBI," she said immediately. "No," I said. "Look at the message. This guy wants to play games. We bring in the feds, he might panic and hurt her. Danny, this is way beyond a missing person case now." "I know, but he chose me for a reason, wants me to follow his trail, and I'm gonna do it, because that's what you do when a 17-year-old kid is staring at his phone waiting for his sister to come home. That's what you do when parents who worked 16-hour days to give their daughter a better life are counting on you to bring her back safe. You play the game, even when you know it's rigged." I started looking for the next piece of the trail, examining every inch of the grove for clues. That's when I noticed the trees weren't just arranged in a circle. They were marked, carved symbols on some of the trunks, so old and weathered they were barely visible. Letters and numbers that didn't make sense until I realized they were coordinates. The coordinates led me deeper into the forest, away from any established trail. As I hiked, I started putting together a profile of who I was dealing with. Someone smart enough to stay off law enforcement radar. Someone who'd been planning this for a long time. That grove didn't happen overnight. someone who knew these woods as well as I did, and someone who wanted an audience for whatever he was doing to Sarah. The coordinates led to an old logging camp, abandoned for decades. Most of the buildings had collapsed, but there was one cabin that looked like it might still be structurally sound. And there, nailed to the front door, was another piece of Sarah's equipment, her digital camera. I turned it on and there was one new photo on it. Sarah, again, this time standing next to what looked like a map spread across a table. She was pointing to a location marked with a red X. But what made my stomach drop was the timestamp on the photo. It had been taken 6 hours ago, which meant whoever had Sarah was moving her around, staying ahead of me. My phone rang. "Hello, Danny?" The voice was calm, educated, older man, maybe 50s or 60s. "Where is she?" "Safe, for now. Though I have to say I'm impressed with how quickly you found the grove. Most people would have missed the significance of the tree arrangement." "What do you want?" "What I want is a conversation. You see, Danny, I've been watching you work and I'm fascinated by your abilities. The way you read sign, the way you seem to know exactly where to look. It's almost supernatural. It's just experience." "No, it's more than that. Sarah thought so too. We had quite a long discussion about it yesterday." The way he said it made my blood run cold. "If you hurt her?" "Hurt her? No, Danny. I'm not some common criminal. I'm a scientist, and Sarah is helping me with an experiment." "What kind of experiment?" "The kind that tests what people are really capable of when everything they think they know gets stripped away. You see, I used to be a professor of psychology, studied human behavior under stress, but the university, they didn't appreciate my methods." There was a pause and I could hear something in the background, maybe wind, maybe running water. "I lost everything, Danny. My job, my tenure, my family, all because I wanted to push the boundaries of what we understand about survival instincts. But out here in the wilderness, there are no ethics committees, no review boards, just pure, raw human nature." "You're sick, am I? Or am I just willing to explore questions that civilized society won't let us ask? Like what happens when someone with your particular talents gets pushed beyond their breaking point?" The line went dead. I stood there in the ruins of that old logging camp staring at Sarah's camera and realized I was dealing with something way beyond a simple kidnapping. This guy wasn't just holding Sarah for ransom. He was using her as bait to study me, but if he thought I was going to be his lab rat, he was about to find out how wrong he was. I studied the photo on Sarah's camera more carefully. The map she was pointing to showed the Olympic Peninsula, with several locations marked. I recognized most of them. Old mining claims, abandoned homesteads, places where someone could hide a cabin and not be bothered for years. But the red X was in an area I knew well. About 5 miles north, in a valley that used to have a small settlement back in the 30s. Nothing left now but foundation stones and old apple trees gone wild. That's where he was taking her. I was sure of it. I called Jessica one more time before heading out. "We found the logging camp," I told her, "and I've got a pretty good idea where he's headed next. But I need you to do something for me. Name it. Call the Chens. Tell them I'm going to bring their daughter home, whatever it takes." Because I was starting to understand that this wasn't just about finding Sarah anymore. This was about proving to some twisted academic that there are lines you don't cross, no matter how curious you are about what's on the other side. The hike to the old settlement took me through some of the roughest terrain in the Olympics. Dense forest, steep ravines, creeks that had to be forded carefully to avoid hypothermia. But as I walked, I started noticing signs that someone else had been this way recently. Broken branches at head height, disturbed ground, a candy bar wrapper that was too clean to have been there long. He was leaving me a trail to follow, which meant he wanted me to find him. That should have made me more nervous than it did. But the truth was, I was getting angry. This bastard had taken a bright young woman who was just trying to do her research, terrorized her family, and now he was playing games with her life. Time to end the games. The old settlement was in a valley between two ridges, hidden from any approach except the one I was taking. As I crested the hill and looked down, I could see smoke rising from the chimney of a cabin that definitely hadn't been there the last time I'd been through this area. He'd built himself a base of operations. Probably been planning this for months, maybe years. I worked my way down the slope carefully, staying in the tree line where I could observe without being seen. Through binoculars, I could see the cabin was new construction, but built to look old. Solar panels on the roof, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. A generator shed disguised as an old outhouse. This guy had money and patience. And there, sitting on the porch like she was waiting for a bus, was Sarah. She was alive, didn't look hurt, but she was definitely restrained. I could see rope around her ankles and her hands were behind her back. But what struck me was her posture. She wasn't slumped over in defeat. She was sitting up straight, alert, watching the tree line like she was looking for something, like she was looking for me. My phone buzzed. Text message. "I see you up there, Danny. Impressive approach. Most people would have come straight down the trail, but you're not most people, are you?" I looked around, trying to figure out where he could see me from. That's when I spotted the cameras. Small, camouflaged, but there, mounted in trees around the perimeter of the valley. Motion sensors, maybe night vision. This guy had turned the whole area into a surveillance zone. Another text. "Come down. Leave your weapons by the tree line. It's time we met properly." I didn't have much choice. Sarah was right there, maybe 50 yards away, and I could see she was okay for now. But I also knew that if I tried to approach without showing myself, he might panic and hurt her. I left my hunting knife stuck in a tree where he could see it, along with the canister of bear spray I'd been carrying. Kept my hands visible as I walked down the slope toward the cabin. That's when he stepped out onto the porch. He looked exactly like what he was, a college professor who'd gone completely off the rails. Maybe 60 years old, gray beard, wearing expensive hiking clothes that had seen some use. But it was his eyes that got to me. Intelligent, curious, and completely without empathy. "Danny Reeves," he said like we were being introduced at a cocktail party. "Dr. Marcus Webb. I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to this conversation." "Let her go," I said. "This is between you and me now." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong. This was never just between us. Sarah is an integral part of the experiment. You see, I needed to understand how your abilities would function under extreme emotional pressure. And what creates more pressure than knowing an innocent person's life depends on your performance." I looked at Sarah. She was staring at me with those dark eyes, and I could see her trying to tell me something without speaking. Her head moved almost imperceptibly toward the woods to her left. "What abilities?" I said, trying to keep Webb talking while I figured out what Sarah was trying to show me. "Don't be modest, Danny. I've been studying your case files for months. The missing hikers you found when search and rescue teams had given up. The lost children you tracked through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate. The way you seem to know exactly where to look, even when there's no logical reason." He walked closer and I could see the excitement in his eyes, like a kid on Christmas morning. "I have a theory about people like you. I think trauma and isolation can trigger dormant survival instincts that most humans never access. Your military service, your time alone in the wilderness, the stress of losing your job. It's all shaped you into something beyond normal human capability." "I'm just good at my job." "No, you're evolved, and I want to understand how." That's when I saw what Sarah had been trying to show me. There was another building hidden in the trees to the left. Looked like an equipment shed, but the door was standing open, and I could see something metallic glinting inside. "So what's the experiment?" I asked. "Simple. I'm going to take away everything you normally rely on, your equipment, your communication, your familiarity with the terrain, and see if your abilities become stronger or weaker under maximum stress." He pulled out a device that looked like a TV remote and pointed it at me. "This will disable any GPS units, cell phones, or other electronic devices within 100 meters. We're going analog from here on out." My phone screen went dead. So did my GPS unit. "Now," Webb continued, "Sarah and I are going to relocate to a new position. You'll have exactly 1 hour to find us before the weather turns really nasty. And Danny, if you don't find us in time, Sarah's going to experience firsthand what hypothermia does to the human body." I looked at the sky. Dark clouds were moving in fast from the west and the wind was picking up. The storm Jessica had mentioned was arriving early. You son of a bitch. Now, this is science, not malice. Though I admit the distinction can be difficult to maintain when the subject matter is so fascinating. He walked over to Sarah and untied the rope around her ankles. Come along, my dear. Time for the next phase. Sarah stood up, and for just a second she stumbled against the porch railing. But as she caught herself, she dropped something. A small piece of paper that fluttered to the ground near my feet. Webb didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying his moment of triumph. 1 hour, Danny. Don't disappoint me. They disappeared into the forest, leaving me alone in the valley with dark clouds gathering overhead and the temperature dropping fast. I picked up Sarah's note, written in pencil, probably torn from her field notebook. He's been talking to himself. Mental break getting worse. Has a backup location northeast of here, about 2 miles. Old mine shaft. Says he's going to conclude the experiment there. Please hurry. Smart girl. She'd been paying attention, gathering intelligence even while she was terrified. But as I looked at that note, I realized Webb had made his first mistake. He assumed I'd need to track them through the woods, follow their footprints, try to figure out where they were going. He didn't realize that after 15 years in these mountains, I knew every old mine shaft, every abandoned structure, every place someone could hide within 20 miles of here. And I knew a shortcut. The mine Sarah mentioned was part of an old copper claim that had been worked back in the 20s. Dangerous as hell now. The tunnels were unstable and there were vertical shafts that dropped 100 feet or more into darkness. If Webb was planning to conclude his experiment there, Sarah was in more immediate danger than hypothermia. I started running. The shortcut I knew would take me through rough country, straight up a ridge, then down through a series of ravines that would be treacherous in good weather and potentially deadly with a storm coming in, but it would cut the distance in half. As I climbed, the wind got stronger and the first drops of freezing rain started to fall. Perfect. Not only was I racing against time to save Sarah, but I was going to have to do it in conditions that could kill me just as easy as they could kill her. That's when I realized Webb might be crazier than I'd thought, but he wasn't stupid. He'd timed this perfectly. The storm would force me to push beyond normal limits, and if I made a mistake, slipped on a wet rock, took a wrong turn in low visibility, twisted an ankle, then both Sarah and I would die, and he'd have his data about what happens when survival instincts get overwhelmed by impossible circumstances. But what he didn't understand was that I'd been in impossible circumstances before. 3 years earlier, I'd been part of a search team looking for 2 lost Boy Scouts. We'd been caught in a blizzard that lasted 18 hours. Temperatures dropped to 20 below, and I'd kept those kids alive by digging a snow cave and keeping them warm until rescue arrived. I'd learned something about myself that night. That when everything goes wrong, when all the normal rules stop applying, I don't panic, I get calmer. And right now, climbing through freezing rain toward a confrontation with a madman who had an innocent woman's life in his hands, I was getting very calm indeed. The mine was worse than I remembered. The wooden structures around the shaft entrances had mostly collapsed, and the whole area was littered with rusted equipment and rotting timber. In the storm, with visibility down to maybe 10 feet, it looked like a scene from hell. But I could see light coming from one of the tunnel entrances, and I could hear voices. I worked my way closer, moving from shadow to shadow, trying to get a sense of the layout. Webb had set up some kind of base camp just inside the tunnel entrance. Battery-powered lights, folding chairs, a table with notebooks and what looked like recording equipment. Sarah was sitting in one of the chairs, still tied up, but she looked alert. Webb was pacing back and forth in front of her, talking rapidly. Even from a distance, I could see he was more agitated than he'd been at the cabin. Whatever mental break Sarah had mentioned in her note, it was getting worse. "You have to understand," he was saying, his voice echoing off the tunnel walls. "This isn't personal. You're contributing to something larger than yourself. When I publish the results of this study, it's going to revolutionize our understanding of human potential under stress. You're not going to publish anything," Sarah said quietly, "because you've lost touch with reality." Wrong thing to say. Webb spun around and slapped her, hard enough that the sound echoed through the tunnel. That's when I stopped being calm and started getting angry. I'd brought one advantage with me that Webb didn't know about. During my years as a ranger, I'd gotten pretty good at moving through difficult terrain without making noise. And mine tunnels, despite all their dangers, have one useful characteristic. They muffle sound from outside. I made my way around to a secondary entrance, one of the collapsed tunnels that still had enough clearance for a person to squeeze through. It would put me behind Webb's position, give me the element of surprise. But as I crawled through the narrow opening, I realized Webb had anticipated this possibility. There were tripwires strung across the tunnel, connected to what looked like small explosive devices. Not enough to bring down the mine, but definitely enough to hurt someone and alert him to their presence. Clever bastard, but not clever enough. I'd spent 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the Forest Service. I knew about tripwires, and I knew about moving through hostile territory where one mistake could get you killed. It took me 15 minutes to work my way through that tunnel, disabling his traps as I went. And with every wire I cut, every device I disabled, I got more impressed with Webb's preparation and more pissed off at what he was putting Sarah through. When I finally reached a position where I could see into the main tunnel, Webb was still pacing and lecturing. But now he had a gun in his hand. The remarkable thing about your friend Danny is that he represents the next phase of human evolution, survival instincts honed to superhuman levels by trauma and isolation. But I need to know what his breaking point is. How much pressure can I apply before those instincts shut down entirely? He's going to find us, Sarah said. And when he does, he's going to face an impossible choice. Save you or save himself. And I'm going to record every second of his decision-making process. Webb turned toward the tunnel entrance, and I could see his face clearly for the first time. He wasn't just crazy, he was excited. This whole thing was entertainment for him. "Danny," he called out. "I know you're out there. I can sense you the same way you can sense me. Come on in. It's time for the final phase of our experiment." I had 2 choices. Try to take him by surprise or play along with his game long enough to get close to Sarah. I decided to give him what he wanted. "I'm here," I called out, stepping into the tunnel with my hands visible. "Let's talk." Webb smiled like I'd just given him a Christmas present. "Excellent, and right on time. You made the 2-mile journey in 43 minutes, which is quite impressive given the terrain and weather conditions." "I'm impressed you timed it." "Oh, I've been timing everything, Danny. Your entire performance has been recorded and analyzed. Do you want to know what I've learned?" "Sure." "You're not just good at tracking and finding people. You're operating on a level of situational awareness that borders on precognitive. You anticipated my moves, found shortcuts I didn't know existed, disabled security measures that should have taken you hours to navigate." He raised the gun, pointing it casually in Sarah's direction. "But here's what I really want to know. What happens to those abilities when the stakes become truly life or death?" "You're about to find out," I said. Because while Webb had been talking, I'd been counting the distance between me and Sarah, between me and Webb, between Sarah and the tunnel entrance, calculating angles, cover positions, reaction times. And I'd realized something that Webb, for all his preparation and intelligence, had missed. He was standing in the worst possible tactical position, back to a solid rock wall, no cover, and the gun in his hand was pointing away from me while he gestured with it toward Sarah. When I moved fast. 3 steps forward, dive left, roll behind an old mining cart that was rusty but solid enough to stop bullets. Webb's gun went off twice, but he was surprised and his shots went wide. "Sarah," I yelled. "When I say go, you run for the entrance." Webb was yelling something about ruining his experiment, but I wasn't listening anymore. I'd spotted something else he'd missed in his careful planning. One of his own explosive devices attached to a support beam about 10 feet from where he was standing. I had one shot at this. I came up from behind the mining cart, throwing a piece of broken timber as hard as I could at the explosive device. It hit dead center and the small charge went off exactly as designed. Not enough to bring down the tunnel, but more than enough to bring down the rotted support beam it was attached to. Webb saw it coming and tried to dive clear, but he was carrying too much equipment and moving too slow. The beam caught him across the shoulder and drove him to the ground, pinning him under several 100 pounds of timber. "Go!" I yelled to Sarah, but she was already moving. had gotten herself untied while I was distracting Webb. Smart, resourceful, tough as hell. Her parents had raised her right. Webb was hurt, but not unconscious. As Sarah ran past him toward the entrance, he managed to grab her ankle with his free hand. That's when I stopped thinking tactically and started thinking like someone whose family was being threatened. I pulled Webb's hand off Sarah's ankle, grabbed him by the front of his shirt and looked him straight in the eyes. "You want to know what my breaking point is?" I said. "Hurt innocent people. That's where my survival instincts turn into something else entirely." I could see in his eyes that he finally understood the difference between studying predatory behavior and actually encountering it. "The experiment's over, Doc." Webb was still alive when the rescue teams arrived 2 hours later. But he was going to be spending the rest of his life in a prison medical facility. Turned out he'd been planning this for over a year, had kidnapped 2 other people for research purposes before Sarah, though they hadn't survived his experiments. Sarah spent 1 night in the hospital for observation, then went home to her family. I was there when she walked through the door of that little restaurant in the International District. Mrs. Chen cried so hard she couldn't stand up, and Kevin hugged his sister like he was never going to let her go again. Mr. Chen shook my hand with both of his, didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. Some things don't require words. Sarah recovered completely, finished her research project, and went on to get her PhD. Last I heard, she was working for the National Park Service, studying forest ecosystems. Smart, tough, and careful. Everything her parents always knew she was. As for me, I learned something about myself out there in those mountains. Webb was right about one thing. I do have abilities that go beyond normal tracking skills. But what he didn't understand is that those abilities don't come from trauma or isolation. They come from caring about people enough to push beyond what you think is possible. When you've got a 17-year-old kid waiting for his sister to come home, when you've got parents who've sacrificed everything for their daughter's future, when you've got an innocent woman whose only crime was being curious about how trees communicate, that's when you find out what you're really capable of. That's when ordinary people become something more. And that's why I keep doing this work even when it scares the hell out of me. Because sometimes, when everything goes wrong and the normal rules stop applying, someone needs to be ready to go beyond normal limits. Someone needs to bring the lost ones home. My name is Tom Bradford, and I'm going to tell you about the worst damn day of my life. Hell, it wasn't just one day. It was 4 days that nearly broke me in ways I didn't think were possible. I'm 34 now, been a forest ranger for 8 years before I went private, and I thought I'd seen every kind of nightmare these mountains could throw at a man. I was wrong. Dead wrong. Look, I know how this sounds, but I gotta tell someone what really happened out there in Glacier National Park back in October 2008. The newspapers got it all twisted, said it was just another missing hiker case that ended badly. But that's bullshit. What went down in those mountains? Christ, I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. See, I'd been working as a private wilderness consultant for about 2 years by then. The economy was going to hell, banks failing left and right, people losing their homes. But somehow that made families even more desperate when their loved ones went missing. They'd scrape together whatever money they had and call guys like me when the official search and rescue teams came up empty. That's exactly what happened on October 23rd when my phone rang at 5:47 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the clock wondering who the hell was calling me before dawn. The voice on the other end was shaking so bad I could barely make out the words. "Mr. Bradford, this is Dr. Helen Chen. My daughter Sarah is missing in Glacier National Park, and the rangers say..." Her voice broke completely then, and I heard a man take the phone. "This is David Chen, Helen's husband. Our daughter Sarah has been missing for 4 days. She's a graduate student at the University of Montana, doing climate research up in the high country. The Park Service says they've done everything they can, but..." His voice got real quiet. "We know you find people when others can't." That right there, that desperation in his voice, that's what got me. See, I've always had this thing where I can't walk away from families who are falling apart. Maybe it's because I lost my own brother when I was 12. Or maybe I'm just stupid that way. Either way, I told them I'd be there by noon. The drive from my cabin in Whitefish to West Glacier takes about an hour on a good day. That morning, with the snow starting to come down and my mind racing, it felt like forever. I kept thinking about what Dr. Chen had told me. Sarah was 28, environmental science grad student, been up in the Highline Trail area collecting data on temperature variations and tree line changes. Smart girl, experienced hiker, but she'd missed 2 scheduled radio check-ins with her research advisor. 4 days. Jesus. After 4 days in late October in those mountains, with temperatures dropping below freezing every night, I tried not to think about what that meant. When I pulled into the parking lot at the visitor center, I spotted the Chen family immediately. You develop an eye for that kind of raw desperation after you've been in this business long enough. Dr. Helen Chen was pacing near the park entrance, this tiny Asian woman in her 50s who looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her husband David stood beside their car, a sensible Honda Civic that screamed middle-class academics, talking quietly on a flip phone. Their son Marcus, maybe early 20s, sat on the hood looking lost. The mother rushed over the second she saw me get out of my truck. "Mr. Bradford? Oh, thank God you came. Please tell me you can find her. The rangers say there's nothing more they can do, but she's out there somewhere, I know she is. A mother knows these things." Her hands were shaking so bad she could barely hold the manila folder she was carrying. Inside were Sarah's research permits, maps of her planned route, and a photo that hit me right in the gut. A young woman with her mother's features and her father's serious eyes, wearing a University of Montana sweatshirt and grinning at the camera. She looked so damn alive in that picture. "She calls every day at 6 p.m., Dr. Chen continued, the words tumbling out like a dam had burst. "Every single day for 3 weeks. Same time, same check-in. Then 4 days ago. Nothing. The Rangers found her base camp intact, but no sign of where she went from there. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be like the others. See, I've got what you might call enhanced senses when it comes to tracking. I can spot signs that others miss. Footprints in places where there shouldn't be any. Broken vegetation that tells a story. Changes in animal behavior that signal something's wrong. It's not magic or any of that bullshit. It's just that my brain processes these details differently than most people's. But standing there listening to Helen Chen describe her daughter's habits and routines, I felt something else. A heaviness in the air that told me this case was going to test every ability I had. David Chen walked over and shook my hand. "The lead ranger, Thompson, he's a good man. He'll brief you on what they've covered so far. But, Mr. Bradford," he looked me straight in the eye, "if there's even a chance she's alive out there, please, we'll pay whatever you ask." I told them my rate, $300 a day plus expenses, and watched David's face tighten. That was serious money for a couple of professors, especially with the economy in the toilet. But Helen just nodded immediately. "Whatever it takes." That's when their son Marcus spoke up for the first time. "Mom, Dad, maybe we should consider... it's been 4 days in this weather." "Don't." Helen's voice cut like a blade. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. Your sister is alive and Mr. Bradford is going to find her." The kid shut up, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Hell, I was feeling some doubt myself. 4 days in October in Glacier National Park meant Sarah Chen was either very lucky, very smart, or very dead. Ranger Thompson briefed me on their search efforts. Standard grid pattern, helicopter sweeps when the weather allowed, search dogs at the base camp. They'd covered about 60% of Sarah's possible range based on her research plans and typical hiking speeds. The problem was the terrain. Avalanche chutes, cliff faces, and dense forest that could hide a person 10 feet away from a search team. "We found her research equipment at a site about 3 miles up from base camp," Thompson explained, pointing at his map. "Looks like she'd been taking soil samples and measuring tree diameters. Everything was organized, methodical. No signs of distress or hurried departure." That right there was the first thing that bothered me. See, when someone gets lost or injured, they usually leave signs. Scattered equipment, disturbed ground, signs of panic. But Sarah's research site sounded too neat, too organized. Like she'd finished her work and then simply vanished. "Mind if I take a look at that site myself?" I asked. "Be my guest, but Mr. Bradford..." Thompson's voice dropped. I've been doing search and rescue for 15 years. After 4 days in this weather, with temperatures hitting the low 20s every night, I think you should prepare the family for the worst. I nodded, but something in my gut told me it wasn't going to be that simple. By 2 p.m. I was geared up and heading into the backcountry. October in Glacier is unforgiving. Snow patches in the shadows, ice on the rocks, and that thin mountain air that'll leave you gasping if you're not used to it. But the thing about late fall is that everything becomes more focused. The tourists are gone, the animals are preparing for winter, and the forest gets quiet in a way that lets you hear things you'd miss in summer. I found Sarah's base camp exactly where the rangers had said it would be, a small clearing about 2 miles up the Highline Trail. Her tent was still standing, guy lines tight, rainfly properly secured. Inside, everything was organized with military precision. Sleeping bag rolled and stowed, food properly stored in bare canisters, research notebooks sealed in waterproof bags. This girl knew what she was doing out here, but it was what I found at her research site that made my blood run cold. The rangers were right. Everything looked methodical, organized, purposeful. Too purposeful. Her soil samples were labeled and bagged with scientific precision. Her measurement tools were clean and properly stored. Her notebook entries were complete through 4:30 p.m. on October 19th, the last day anyone heard from her. Here's where my abilities kicked in. See, when you've spent as much time in the wilderness as I have, you develop an eye for things that don't fit. And everything about this scene felt wrong. The ground around her work area had been disturbed, but not by Sarah. Someone else had been here after she left. I found the first footprint about 20 yards from her research site, a size 11 hiking boot with an aggressive tread pattern. Sarah wore a size 7 according to her gear list. Someone else had been tracking her, watching her work, waiting for the right moment. That's when the hair on the back of my neck started standing up. This wasn't just a lost hiker case anymore. I spent the rest of the afternoon following 2 sets of tracks. Sarah's size 7s heading northwest toward a series of alpine meadows, and those size 11s following about 30 yards behind. Whoever was tracking her knew how to move in the wilderness. The prints were placed carefully, avoiding soft ground where they'd leave clear impressions, sticking to rocks and hard-packed earth where possible. But I've always been good at reading sign, and this tracker had made one mistake. Near a stream crossing, he'd stepped in some mud and left a perfect print. The boot was expensive, Scarpa mountaineering boots, probably $400 retail. Not the kind of gear you'd expect from some random creep wandering the mountains. This was someone who knew what he was doing. As the sun started setting, I found something that made my hands shake. Sarah's red fleece jacket hung carefully on a tree branch about 4 miles from her base camp. It wasn't torn or damaged. It had been placed there deliberately, like a marker or a message. That's when my phone rang. Helen Chen's voice was tight with desperate hope. "Mr. Bradford, have you found anything? Anything at all?" I looked at that red fleece hanging in the gathering darkness and made a decision that probably saved Sarah's life. "Mrs. Chen, I'm gonna need you to call the FBI. This isn't a missing person case anymore. Someone took your daughter." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd lost connection. Then Helen Chen started crying. Not the desperate sobs I'd expected, but the quiet, terrified weeping of a mother who's just had her worst fears confirmed. Are you certain?" "Yes, ma'am. I'll keep tracking tonight, but you need to get federal agents involved. This is a kidnapping." What I didn't tell her was that kidnappings in the wilderness usually end one of 2 ways: ransom demands or body recovery. And given the isolated location and the methodical way this had been carried out, I was betting this wasn't about money. As darkness fell and the temperature started dropping toward freezing, I made camp about a 1/4 mile from where I'd found the jacket. I had maybe 6 hours of good tracking light tomorrow before weather was supposed to move in, and something told me those 6 hours were going to determine whether Sarah Chen came home alive. But that night, lying in my sleeping bag and listening to the wind howl through the pines, I kept thinking about those size 11 boot prints. Professional-grade equipment, careful movement patterns, intimate knowledge of the terrain. This wasn't some opportunistic predator who'd stumbled across a lone hiker. This was someone who'd been planning this for a while, and Sarah Chen had walked right into his trap. By dawn on day 2 of my search, the temperature had dropped to 18 degrees and a light snow was starting to fall. Not good news when you're trying to follow a track that's already 24 hours old. But I've always had this ability to read the landscape in ways that don't make sense to other people. Seeing patterns in broken vegetation, sensing the flow of movement across terrain, almost feeling where someone has passed. The trail led northwest toward the high country, climbing steadily through terrain that would challenge even experienced hikers. Whoever had Sarah knew these mountains intimately. The route avoided obvious places where searchers would look, stayed below ridgelines where helicopter sweeps might spot movement, and followed game trails that didn't appear on any topographical map. About 3 miles from where I'd found the jacket, the trail split. Sarah's prints went one direction, uphill toward a series of remote alpine lakes. The size 11 boots went another way entirely, looping around to approach the same area from a different angle. Classic hunting behavior. Drive the prey where you want them to go, then intercept. That's when I found the first trap. It was subtle, a depression in the trail covered with loose pine needles and small branches. If you weren't looking for it, you'd step right into it and probably break your ankle. The scary thing was how professional it looked. This wasn't some improvised hazard. It was a carefully constructed trap designed to disable someone without causing immediately life-threatening injuries. My hands were shaking as I disarmed it and continued following the trail, because now I knew exactly what kind of predator I was dealing with. Someone who wanted his victims alive and mobile enough to participate in whatever sick game he had planned. The trail led to a narrow canyon with steep walls on both sides, perfect terrain for an ambush. Sarah's tracks showed she'd been moving faster here, probably sensing danger, but there was nowhere to run. The canyon walls were too steep to climb, and the only way out was forward or back. At the far end of the canyon, I found evidence of a struggle. Torn fabric caught on a branch, disturbed ground, and drops of blood on a flat rock. Not enough blood to indicate serious injury, but enough to show that Sarah had fought back. And that's where the trail went cold. No more footprints, no more broken vegetation, no more sign of passage. It was like 2 people had simply vanished into thin air. I spent 2 hours searching every inch of that canyon, using every tracking skill I'd learned in 8 years as a ranger, and found nothing. That's when I heard it, a sound that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, but unmistakably human. Someone was screaming. The sound was coming from above, somewhere up on the canyon rim. I found a place where the rock face was broken enough to climb and started working my way up, following handholds that someone else had used recently. My fingers were numb with cold, and more than once I nearly lost my grip on the icy stone. Halfway up the wall, I found a narrow ledge that led to a hidden cave entrance. The opening was small, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, concealed behind a screen of ice-covered pine boughs. If you didn't know it was there, you'd never find it. That's where the screaming was coming from. I pulled out my flashlight and crawled into the cave, following a narrow passage that opened into a larger chamber. What I found there still haunts my dreams. Sarah Chen was alive, but barely. She was chained to a metal stake driven into the cave floor, wearing only her hiking boots and underwear. Her lips were blue with cold, and she was shivering so violently she could barely speak. But her eyes... Christ, her eyes were still alert, still fighting. Sarah? Sarah, I'm Tom Bradford. Your parents sent me to find you. She tried to speak but could only manage a whisper. He said you'd come. Said you were supposed to be good at this. That's when I realized we weren't alone in the cave. Mr. Bradford. The voice came from the shadows near the back wall, calm, educated, with the kind of authority you'd expect from a college professor. I was wondering when you'd arrive. A man stepped into the beam of my flashlight. Mid-50s, gray beard, expensive outdoor gear. He was holding what looked like a modified cattle prod in one hand and a digital camera in the other. Dr. Marcus Kellerman, he said, like we were meeting at a faculty cocktail party. I used to teach psychology at the University of Chicago before my unfortunate departure from academia. You probably haven't heard of my work on stress response and survival instincts, but you're about to become intimately familiar with it. That's when everything clicked into place. This wasn't a random kidnapping or even a typical sexual predator case. This was something much worse. A methodical, scientific torture scenario designed by someone who understood exactly how to break the human psyche. See, Mr. Bradford, I've been studying survival behavior for over 20 years. How humans respond to extreme stress, what psychological breaking points look like, how long the average person can maintain hope before surrendering to despair. Miss Chen here has been an excellent subject, but she's only one data point. He gestured toward me with the cattle prod. You, on the other hand, represent something far more interesting. A professional tracker, someone trained to operate in extreme conditions, someone who's made a career out of finding the unfindable. I'm very curious to see how long you'll last. I was calculating distances, looking for weapons, planning my attack, when Kellerman smiled and shook his head. I wouldn't advise any sudden movements. You see, Miss Chen is wearing a rather ingenious device around her neck. If my heart rate increases beyond normal parameters, measured by this handy little wireless monitor, or if I don't press this button every 60 seconds, she receives a lethal dose of electricity. Technology is wonderful, isn't it? That's when I understood the true genius of his trap. He hadn't just captured Sarah. He'd turned her into a weapon against anyone who tried to rescue her. Any aggressive move on my part would kill the person I'd come to save. Now then, Kellerman continued, settling into what looked like a folding camp chair. Let's begin your psychological evaluation, shall we? First question. How does it feel to know that your best efforts have led directly to Miss Chen's death? I didn't understand what he meant until I heard the electronic beep behind me. While I'd been focused on him, something had triggered a timer. Sarah's eyes went wide with terror. 60 seconds, Mr. Bradford. Then Miss Chen dies, and we move on to the second phase of the experiment. I do hope you're as resourceful as your reputation suggests. That's when everything went to hell. My GPS started beeping frantically. The screen showed error messages I'd never seen before. My radio crackled with static and then went completely dead. Even my digital camera was malfunctioning, cycling through menu screens on its own. Electromagnetic pulse device, Kellerman explained casually as I frantically tried to figure out what was triggering the timer. Crude but effective for disabling modern electronics. I'm afraid you'll have to solve this puzzle using more primitive methods. 45 seconds. I could hear Sarah whimpering behind me as I searched the cave walls for whatever was controlling the timer. There, a small electronic device mounted near the ceiling, its red LED blinking steadily. But it was at least 12 feet above the cave floor, and the walls were smooth stone. 30 seconds. Interesting, Kellerman observed, making notes in a leather journal. Subject shows classic stress response patterns but maintains focus on problem solving rather than emotional breakdown. Heart rate elevated but not yet approaching panic levels. 20 seconds. That's when I remembered something my old partner used to say. When you can't go over or around, sometimes the answer is to go through. I grabbed the biggest rock I could find and hurled it at the device on the ceiling. Missed by 2 feet. 15 seconds. Second rock. Closer, but still missed. Sarah was sobbing now, pulling against her chains. 10 seconds. I could feel Kellerman watching me, clinically observing my problem-solving process like I was a lab rat in a maze. Third rock sailed just past the device. 5 seconds. Fourth rock hit dead center. The device sparked and went dark just as the timer reached 0. Excellent, Kellerman actually applauded. Crude but effective. You show remarkable ability to function under extreme temporal pressure. But that was just the warm-up exercise. That's when he showed me the second device. Another timer, this one mounted even higher on the opposite wall. But this time there was a twist. This next challenge requires a choice, Mr. Bradford. You can save Miss Chen's life by reaching that device within 2 minutes. But to do so, you'll have to use the rope ladder I've provided. He pointed toward a thin climbing rope that dangled from the cave ceiling. The problem is that the rope has been treated with a contact poison, absorbs through the skin in about 90 seconds, causes complete muscular paralysis followed by respiratory failure. You'll have just enough time to reach the device and stop the timer, but you won't survive the descent. Sarah was staring at me with desperate eyes, and I could see the question there. Would I die to save her? 90 seconds, Kellerman announced, starting the timer. Choose wisely. That's when I realized what this was really about. Kellerman wasn't just studying individual survival responses. He was testing the limits of human altruism. How far would someone go to save a stranger? What psychological pressures would drive a person to sacrifice their own life? But here's the thing about having enhanced abilities that most people don't understand. They don't just make you better at tracking or navigation. They make you better at seeing solutions that other people miss. I'd noticed something about the cave structure that Kellerman had overlooked. The chamber we were in wasn't natural. It had been carved out by water flow over thousands of years, which meant there had to be another entrance somewhere, probably connected to the underground stream I could hear flowing behind the back wall. 75 seconds. Instead of going for the poisoned rope, I started examining the walls near where I could hear running water. My enhanced spatial memory kicked in, showing me how the rock formations outside the cave connected to this interior space. 60 seconds. There, a crack in the stone near the floor, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. I could feel air movement, which meant it led somewhere. Fascinating, Kellerman murmured. Subject has abandoned the obvious solution and is exploring alternative approaches. This wasn't anticipated in the experimental design. 45 seconds. I squeezed through the crack and found myself in a narrow tunnel that sloped upward. The sound of running water was louder here, and I could feel warmer air flowing from above. This had to connect to another cave system somewhere higher up the mountain. 30 seconds. The tunnel opened into a second chamber directly above the first one. I could see the timer device mounted on the wall below me, about 8 feet down through another crack in the stone. 15 seconds. I dropped through the opening and grabbed the device with both hands, ripping it away from its mounting just as the timer hit 0. Remarkable, Kellerman said as I climbed back down to the main chamber. You've displayed both spatial reasoning abilities and physical problem-solving skills well above normal parameters. I'm beginning to understand why you have such a reputation in wilderness rescue. But I could see in his eyes that the games were just beginning. That's when he activated the third device. This final test is quite simple, Mr. Bradford. Miss Chen has been injected with a slow-acting neurotoxin that will cause complete nervous system shutdown in approximately 6 hours. The antidote is contained in a vial that I've hidden somewhere within a 5-mile radius of this location. You have until dawn to find it and return here. He held up a small GPS device. This will guide you to the general area, but finding the exact location will require all of your famous tracking abilities. Of course, there are several additional challenges I've prepared along the route, obstacles designed to test your physical and psychological limits. Sarah tried to speak but could barely whisper. The poison was already starting to affect her nervous system. The beauty of this final experiment, Kellerman continued, is that it forces you to leave Miss Chen here with me while you search for her salvation. Every minute you spend looking for the antidote is a minute she spends wondering if you'll abandon her. Every obstacle you encounter will tempt you to give up and save yourself. The psychological pressure is exquisite. He handed me the GPS device and smiled. 6 hours, Mr. Bradford. Miss Chen's life depends on your ability to overcome every challenge I've designed. I do hope you're as good as everyone says you are. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my professional career. I trusted that bastard and left Sarah alone with him while I went searching for the antidote. It took me 40 minutes to realize I'd been played. The GPS device led me exactly where Kellerman wanted me to go, into a series of traps and obstacles that had nothing to do with saving Sarah and everything to do with testing my limits. Deadfalls that required split-second reflexes to avoid. Concealed pits filled with sharpened stakes. Snares designed to catch and hold rather than kill. By the time I figured out it was all bullshit, I was 3 miles from the cave, bleeding from a dozen cuts and completely lost in a blizzard that had rolled in while I was navigating Kellerman's obstacle course. That's when my equipment failures started cascading. My backup GPS died completely. Not just dead batteries, but actual electronic failure like it had been fried from the inside. My radio was picking up nothing but static. Even my compass was spinning wildly, unable to find magnetic north. The son of a bitch had planned it all perfectly. Get me away from Sarah, disable my navigation equipment, and leave me wandering in a snowstorm while he did whatever he wanted to his captive victim. I was stumbling through knee-deep snow, unable to see more than 5 feet in any direction, when I heard the helicopter. At first I thought it was rescue. Maybe the FBI had finally gotten involved and was conducting a search, but as the sound got closer, I realized it was coming from the wrong direction. This chopper was heading toward the cave where I'd left Sarah. That's when I understood the final piece of Kellerman's plan. He'd never intended to kill Sarah slowly with some exotic poison. He'd wanted me out of the way while he transported her to a secondary location where he could continue his experiments without interference. I was 5 miles from the cave with no working navigation equipment, trapped in a blizzard, and my phone was showing no signal bars. Sarah was about to disappear forever, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do to stop it. But here's what Kellerman didn't know about me. I've been lost in worse conditions and found my way out using abilities that don't depend on modern technology. See, when you spend enough time in the wilderness, you develop an almost supernatural sense of direction. It's not magic. It's your brain processing thousands of tiny environmental cues that most people ignore. The way snow drifts form around obstacles, how wind patterns change based on terrain features, the subtle differences in air pressure that tell you which direction is downhill. I closed my eyes, filtered out the panic and frustration, and let my enhanced spatial memory reconstruct the route I'd taken from the cave. 3 miles northeast to the first trap. 2 miles south through the deadfall obstacles. 1 mile west to where the GPS had finally led me into this wilderness dead zone, which meant the cave was approximately 4 miles southeast of my current position. In a complete whiteout, with no equipment, that should have been impossible to navigate. But I've always had this ability to sense direction even in total darkness. Something about how my inner ear processes motion and balance, combined with an unconscious awareness of magnetic fields. I started moving southeast, counting steps and tracking time, using every wilderness navigation technique I'd learned in 8 years as a ranger. When I hit what felt like the right canyon system, I started climbing toward where I remembered the cave entrance being located. The helicopter sound was getting fainter, moving away from the area, probably carrying Sarah to whatever secondary location Kellerman had prepared. I was running out of time. That's when I heard voices coming from inside the cave. "She's responding well to the stimuli," Kellerman was saying to someone else. Heart rate elevated, pupil dilation consistent with extreme fear response, but no signs of complete psychological breakdown yet. A second voice responded, younger, male, with a slight accent I couldn't place. The tracker should be completely lost by now. Even if he survives the storm, it'll take him hours to find his way back here. Mr. Bradford is more resourceful than you think, David. That's why he's such a perfect test subject, but you're right. We have at least 4 hours before he could possibly return. More than enough time to complete the psychological conditioning phase. David? I knew that name. David Chen, Sarah's father. But that was impossible. He was back in West Glacier with his wife, waiting for news about his daughter. Unless the pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. The inside knowledge of Sarah's research schedule, the detailed information about her hiking routes and camping preferences, the way the family had found me so quickly after the Park Service had given up their search. David Chen hadn't hired me to find his daughter. He'd hired me to witness her death. I crawled closer to the cave entrance and peered inside. Kellerman was still there, but now he had a partner, a man in his 50s wearing expensive hiking gear and carrying a professional video camera. The insurance policy pays double indemnity for accidental death in a wilderness setting, David Chen was explaining as he adjusted his camera angle. Sarah's life insurance was only worth $50,000, but with the accidental death clause in the education loan forgiveness program, we're looking at nearly $200,000 total. Plus the research grant money, Kellerman added. Don't forget that she'd already received the full semester funding for her climate change project. Money that reverts to next of kin if the research is never completed due to accidental death of the primary investigator. Sarah was conscious but barely able to move, whatever drug they'd given her having nearly paralyzed her nervous system. but her eyes were alert, and I could see the horrific understanding in them. Her own father was orchestrating her murder for insurance money. "The beauty of your experimental framework," David continued, "is that it provides perfect cover for the death. Crazy psychology professor tortures and kills young researcher while deranged tracker tries desperately to save her. Very tragic, very believable, and completely removes me from suspicion." "What about Bradford?" Kellerman asked. "Oh, he won't be leaving these mountains alive," David said casually. "Too many questions he could ask, too many details he might remember. Better to have him disappear permanently. Another tragic casualty of your psychological experiments." That's when I realized just how deep this conspiracy went. David Chen had researched my background, learned about my reputation for finding missing persons, and specifically requested me knowing that I'd be thorough enough to uncover evidence of foul play. But instead of that evidence leading to Sarah's rescue, it would become part of the cover story for her murder. I was supposed to die trying to save her, making us both victims of Kellerman's madness rather than survivors who could expose the truth. But these bastards had made one crucial error in their planning. They'd assumed I was just another wilderness tracker with good instincts and basic survival skills. They had no idea what I was really capable of when everything was on the line. See, all those special abilities I'd developed over the years, the enhanced tracking, the supernatural sense of direction, the ability to read environmental signs, they weren't separate skills. They were all part of a deeper connection to the natural world that most people never develop. And when that connection is fully activated by extreme stress and desperate need, it becomes something approaching the supernatural. I could sense every person in that cave, their exact positions, their emotional states, even their approximate body temperatures. I could feel the layout of the chamber as clearly as if I had blueprints. I knew where every piece of equipment was located, which weapons were within reach, and exactly how much time I had before they started the final phase of their plan. Most importantly, I could sense Sarah's condition with startling clarity. She wasn't dying from some exotic poison. She'd been drugged with a powerful sedative that was wearing off. In about 10 minutes, she'd regain enough motor function to move. In 20 minutes, she'd be able to run. All I had to do was keep her alive that long. I slipped around to the back of the cave where I'd discovered the secondary entrance earlier. The narrow tunnel was barely wide enough for my shoulders, but it would let me get behind Kellerman and David without them knowing I'd returned. "Time to begin the final phase," I heard Kellerman say. "Mr. Chen, if you'd be so kind as to start recording. I want to document Miss Chen's psychological response to learning about her father's betrayal." That's when I came through the tunnel like an avenging angel. The first thing I did was grab Kellerman's cattle prod and drive it into David Chen's ribs. 300,000 volts dropped him like a sack of concrete, his expensive camera shattering on the stone floor. Kellerman spun around, reaching for what looked like a pistol, but I was already moving. 8 years of wilderness work had given me reflexes that most people don't possess. I had the gun out of his hand and the cattle prod pressed against his throat before he could draw a breath. "Here's how this is going to work, Doc," I said, my voice deadly calm despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "You're going to unlock those chains and step away from Sarah. Then you're going to tell me exactly how many other people are involved in this conspiracy. You don't understand the full scope of what you're interfering with," Kellerman said, but I could hear the fear creeping into his voice. "This research has applications far beyond a single insurance fraud case. The military applications alone." I pressed the cattle prod harder against his neck. "I don't give a shit about your research. Unlock the chains, now." He fumbled for a key ring attached to his belt. "Mr. Bradford, you're making a serious mistake. David Chen has connections throughout the academic and federal funding community. People who won't appreciate having their financial arrangements disrupted." "Keep talking," I said, as he unlocked Sarah's restraints. "I want to know exactly how deep this goes." That's when Sarah surprised both of us by moving faster than anyone expected. The sedative was wearing off quicker than they'd planned, and she had enough motor function to grab the pistol that Kellerman had dropped. "You fucking bastards," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "My own father." David Chen was starting to regain consciousness, groaning and trying to sit up. Sarah pointed the gun at his head with hands that were shaking from rage rather than the drugs. "Sarah, don't," I said gently. "He's not worth throwing your life away." 28 years, she said, tears streaming down her face. 28 years I believed he loved me, and all this time he was just waiting for the right opportunity to cash in on my death. That's when Kellerman made his final mistake. He lunged for a backup weapon he had concealed near his camp chair, some kind of modified taser that I hadn't seen before. I hit him with the cattle prod before he could reach it. 300,000 volts through his nervous system dropped him into unconsciousness, and he wouldn't be waking up anytime soon. Sarah was still pointing the gun at her father, and I could see the war between love and betrayal playing out in her eyes. "Look at me, Sarah," I said. "Look at me, not him. You're better than this. You're gonna survive this nightmare, and you're gonna make sure these bastards pay for what they did. But you're not gonna become a killer in the process." She held my gaze for about 10 seconds that felt like an hour. Then she lowered the weapon and started crying. Not the desperate sobs of terror, but the deep, wrenching cries of someone whose entire world had just been revealed as a lie. I used Kellerman's own restraints to secure both him and David Chen, then activated the emergency beacon I always carry for situations exactly like this. Within 2 hours, we had FBI agents and park rangers swarming the cave system. The investigation that followed uncovered a conspiracy involving at least 6 other people: academics, insurance investigators, and federal grant administrators who'd been systematically murdering graduate students and researchers for financial gain. Sarah's case was just one of more than a dozen similar accidents over the past 3 years. David Chen got life without parole. Kellerman got the same, plus additional sentences for kidnapping and torture. The other conspirators received various prison terms that effectively ended their lives. But the real victory was watching Sarah Chen walk out of those mountains alive, despite everything her father and Kellerman had put her through. She was changed by the experience, hell, we both were, but she survived with her humanity intact. That's something worth more than all the insurance money in the world. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, thinking about those 4 days in October 2008. Not because of the physical danger or the elaborate traps or even the betrayal that nearly got us both killed. What haunts me is how close we came to losing everything because I trusted the wrong people and underestimated just how deep human evil can go. But I also learned something about myself in that cave. When everything goes to hell and innocent lives are on the line, I'm capable of things that would scare me under normal circumstances. Those enhanced abilities I've always had, they're not just party tricks for impressing clients. They're tools that can mean the difference between life and death when used properly. Sarah Chen went on to complete her climate research and became one of the leading environmental scientists in the country. She never speaks to her mother anymore. Helen Chen knew about the conspiracy and kept quiet because she thought they needed the money. But Sarah has built a life that honors the person she almost lost in those mountains. Me? Well, I learned not to trust families quite so completely when they hire me to find their missing loved ones. Sometimes the person you're trying to save needs saving from the people who claim to love them most. And sometimes when you're deep in the wilderness with no equipment and no hope, the only thing that can save you is the ability to become something more than human when the situation demands it. That's a lesson worth remembering no matter how many years pass or how many other cases try to erase the memory of those 4 October days when everything changed. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and I'm going to tell you about the worst damn week of my life. October 2008, just when the whole economy was going to hell and everyone was talking about Obama versus McCain. But I wasn't thinking about any of that political bullshit when my phone rang at 6 in the morning on October 15th. I'd been working private consulting for about 3 years by then, ever since I left the Forest Service. 34 years old, thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at me. 8 years as a ranger in various parks, dealt with everything from lost hikers to bear attacks to the occasional suicide. But I had this reputation, see? I could find people when others couldn't. Had this knack for reading signs, tracking, knowing where to look when everyone else was stumped. The voice on the phone was shaking so bad I could barely understand her at first. "Mr. Mitchell, please, you have to help us. Our daughter, she's missing." Linda Chen. That's a name I'll never forget, 'cause the way she said those words, "she's missing," it was like her whole world was collapsing with each syllable. Her husband, Dr. James Chen, got on the line next, trying to sound more composed, but I could hear that same desperation underneath. Their daughter Sarah, 23 years old, graduate student at University of Montana. She'd been researching wolf behavior patterns in Glacier National Park for her thesis. Last contact was 4 days ago. 4 days. In October. In Montana. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be just another search and rescue. Sarah had been staying at a research cabin about 12 miles into the backcountry, near Lake McDonald. She was supposed to check in every evening via satellite phone, university policy for solo researchers. When she missed her first check-in, they figured equipment failure. Second day they got worried. Third day they sent a ranger to the cabin. Empty. All her gear was there, research notes scattered on the table, half-eaten dinner still on the counter. But no Sarah. The rangers, they searched for a whole day, Dr. Chen told me, his voice cracking. They said the trail goes cold about a quarter mile from the cabin, like she just vanished. That's when Linda Chen got back on the phone, and I'll never forget what she said. "Mr. Mitchell, everyone says you're the best, that you find people when no one else can. Please, she's our only daughter. She's all we have." See, that's what gets me every time. It's not the money, never was. It's hearing a parent's voice break like that, knowing that somewhere out there their kid might still be alive, might still be hoping someone's coming for them. I told them I'd be there by noon. The drive to Glacier took me 3 hours. Plenty of time to think about what I was walking into. I'd worked Glacier before, knew the terrain pretty well. October meant snow was already hitting the higher elevations, temperatures dropping into the 20s at night. If Sarah was injured, exposed, well, 4 days was pushing it, 5 days would be a miracle. I met the Chens at park headquarters. Jesus, the sight of them nearly broke my heart right there. Dr. Chen looked like he hadn't slept in a week, his hands shaking as he showed me Sarah's photo. Linda Chen's eyes were so red from crying I don't think she could see straight. And their son Michael, maybe 19 years old, just standing there with this lost look on his face. "She's the smart one," he told me quietly while his parents talked to the rangers. "Sarah's always been the smart one. If anyone could survive out there, it's her." The lead ranger, a guy named Peterson, walked me through what they'd found. Or rather, what they hadn't found. "It's the damnedest thing, Mitchell. We've got experienced trackers, brought in dogs, even had a helicopter up yesterday. It's like she walked a quarter mile into the woods and just disappeared." That's when my first ability kicked in. The one I've had since I was a kid, but never really understood until I started rangering. I can see things others miss, tracks that shouldn't be there, signs that don't add up. Peterson showed me the area where they'd lost her trail, and right away something felt wrong. The footprints they'd been following, Sarah's hiking boots, size 7, they just stopped at a rocky outcrop. But the way they stopped, it wasn't natural. When someone's walking through the forest, even if they're being careful, there's a rhythm to how their feet fall. Weight distribution, stride length, little scuff marks where they catch a root or rock. These prints stopped too clean, like someone had been very deliberately placing each step. "Peterson," I said, crouching down near the last clear print, "you said the dogs lost the scent here?" "Yeah, complete loss, like she just evaporated." I stood up, looking around the area. Dense pine forest, rocky ground, plenty of places to hide a trail, but there was something else bothering me, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. That's when I noticed the silence. Now, I know forest quiet, and this wasn't it. This was the kind of silence that happens when all the animals suddenly decide to be somewhere else. Birds, squirrels, even insects. Everything had cleared out of this area. "When's the last time you guys were through here?" I asked. "Yesterday morning." "Why?" "No reason. Just, you mind if I work alone for a while?" Peterson didn't look happy about it, but he knew my reputation. "Radio check every hour, Mitchell, and don't go hero on us." After they left, I spent the next 2 hours doing what I do best, reading the story the forest was telling me. And it was telling me one hell of a story. First thing I found was a small piece of fabric caught on a branch about 50 yards east of where the official trail ended. Dark blue synthetic material, consistent with the jacket Sarah had been wearing. But here's the thing, it was caught at shoulder height, which meant either Sarah had grown 6 inches since her last photo, or someone taller had been wearing her jacket. Second thing, boot prints, not Sarah's. These were size 11, maybe 12, with a distinctive wear pattern on the left heel. Military boots by the look of them. And they were fresh, maybe a day old at most. Third thing, and this is where it got really interesting, I found a small pile of Sarah's research equipment hidden under a fallen log about 100 yards north. Her camera, GPS unit, and sample collection kit, all carefully arranged, but her notebook was missing. Someone had taken her notebook. By the time I radioed back to Peterson, I had a pretty good idea what we were dealing with. This wasn't a lost hiker or an accident. Someone had taken Sarah Chen, and they'd been very careful about covering their tracks. Peterson, I need you to contact the FBI. This is a kidnapping. Mitchell, are you sure? I mean, we've got no ransom demand, no. Trust me on this one. And get me everything you can on Sarah's research. What exactly was she studying out here? The answer to that question changed everything. Sarah Chen wasn't just studying wolf behavior. She was documenting human encroachment into wolf territory, specifically how military training exercises in the area were affecting wildlife patterns. Her research had identified several unauthorized campsites, illegal hunting activity, and what she'd described in her last report as systematic harassment of local wolf packs. Someone didn't want that research getting out. By late afternoon, I'd tracked the size 11 boots about 3 miles deeper into the backcountry. Whoever this guy was, he knew the terrain well, stuck to rocky ground and creek beds where possible. But he wasn't perfect. I could read his route like a road map. That's when my phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "You're getting warmer, Mitchell. She's still alive for now." My blood went cold. This son of a bitch knew who I was. I called Peterson immediately. "We've got contact. Can you trace this number?" "Already on it. Mitchell, there's something else. We found Sarah's car." "What do you mean you found her car? I thought it was at the trailhead." "Not her Honda, her backup vehicle. Turns out she'd rented a second car in Kalispell 3 days ago. Cash payment, fake name. We found it abandoned on a logging road about 10 miles south of where you're working." That didn't make sense. Why would Sarah rent a second car? And why use a fake name? Unless Sarah Chen wasn't who I thought she was. I spent the next hour going through her research notes that the family had provided. Graduate student wildlife behavior thesis research, it all checked out. But there were gaps, inconsistencies, references to previous field work that didn't match her academic record, equipment requests that seemed way beyond what a grad student should need. My phone buzzed again. "Ask the family about Bangkok, Mitchell. Ask them about the real reason she came home." Bangkok. What the hell did Bangkok have to do with anything? I called Dr. Chen directly. "Doctor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has Sarah ever been to Thailand?" Long pause. Too long. "Mr. Mitchell, I don't see how that's relevant." "Doctor, your daughter's life might depend on how relevant it is." Another pause, then a sigh. She spent 6 months there last year. Teaching English, she said. But she came home early. Wouldn't talk about why. Did she seem different when she came back? Yes, quiet, jumpy. She'd wake up screaming sometimes. We tried to get her to see someone, but she insisted she was fine. Said the graduate program would help her focus on something positive. Teaching English in Thailand. 6 months. Came home early, obviously traumatized. My phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Ryan." The voice was calm, educated, with just a trace of a southern accent. "I've been looking forward to talking with you. Who is this?" "Someone who appreciates your work. I've read about your cases, your talents. Very impressive. Where's Sarah?" "Safe. For now. But we need to have a conversation first, you and I, about truth. about what really brings people into the wilderness. What do you want? I want you to understand. Sarah Chen isn't some innocent graduate student, Ryan. She's running from something. Something that happened in Bangkok that she's never told anyone about. Not even her family. The line went quiet except for the sound of wind through trees. Then, keep following the trail, Ryan, but ask yourself, are you really looking for Sarah Chen? Or are you looking for Li Mei? The phone went dead. Li Mei. That had to be the fake name she'd used to rent the second car. I called Peterson again. I need everything you can find on Sarah Chen's time in Thailand, specifically Bangkok 6 months last year, and run the name Li Mei through the system. Mitchell, what the hell is going on out there? I'm starting to think Sarah Chen came to Glacier to hide from someone, and that someone found her. The trail was getting harder to follow as darkness started falling. October in Montana means you've got maybe 10 hours of decent daylight, and I'd already burned through most of it. But I had another ability that most people don't understand. I can navigate in the dark better than most people can in daylight. It's like I've got an internal compass that just knows which way to go. I was following the creek bed north when I smelled it. Wood smoke, very faint, maybe 2 miles ahead, but mixed with something else, something chemical. Medical, maybe. That's when everything started going wrong. First, my GPS unit died, just shut off completely, wouldn't restart. Then my radio started picking up interference. Weird electronic squealing that made it impossible to communicate. Finally, my flashlight started flickering and died, leaving me in complete darkness. This wasn't equipment failure. This was sabotage. I was digging through my pack for backup batteries when I heard it. A branch cracking behind me. Not the natural sound of an animal moving through the forest. This was deliberate, meant to be heard. You're very good, Ryan. The voice came from maybe 30 feet away, invisible in the darkness. Better than I expected. Show yourself. Oh, I don't think that's wise just yet. We're still getting to know each other. Tell me, what do you think happened to Sarah Chen in Bangkok? Why don't you enlighten me? A low chuckle. She killed someone, Ryan. Self-defense, of course, but still. A very bad man who was doing very bad things to young women. Li Mei. That was her undercover name when she was working with the State Department. State Department. That explained the fake documentation, the ability to disappear. Sarah Chen is a federal agent? Was. She burned that bridge when she went off script in Bangkok. Killed a man the government needed alive, compromised a 2-year investigation. So they burned her back, hung her out to dry. The voice was moving, circling me in the darkness. I tried to track it, but the sound seemed to bounce off the trees in impossible ways. She came here to disappear, Ryan. New identity, quiet life. Maybe finish that graduate degree for real. But men like the one she killed in Bangkok, they have friends. And those friends have long memories. So you're what? Revenge for hire? Oh no, Ryan. I'm much more interesting than that. I'm someone who understands the value of disappearing, of becoming someone new. Sarah and I were more alike than she wants to admit. That's when it hit me. This guy wasn't just some hired gun. He was military, probably special forces, someone who'd learned how to disappear and reappear at will. The equipment sabotage, the psychological games, the way he seemed to know exactly where I was at all times. You're former military. Very good. 82nd Airborne, then Delta Force, then... Well, let's just say I worked for people who don't officially exist, until I learned what those people were really doing with the intelligence I gathered. And what was that? Selling it, Ryan, to the highest bidder. Getting good people killed for money. So I decided to disappear, just like Sarah. The difference is I'm better at it. The voice was closer now, maybe 10 feet away. I could hear his breathing, slow and controlled. Here's what's going to happen, Ryan. You're going to walk away. Tell the family you couldn't find her. Let Sarah Chen disappear the way she wants to. Because if you keep looking, if you force me to make her visible again, well, visibility can be very dangerous for someone with her history. And if I don't, then we'll find out just how good you really are. I heard footsteps moving away, then silence. I was alone in the dark forest, equipment dead, no way to call for help. But I wasn't quitting. Not with Linda Chen's voice still echoing in my head. Not with that family waiting for news. I had to rely on my most basic ability, the one that had kept me alive through 8 years of ranger and 3 years of private work. My ability to read the forest itself, to let it guide me. The wind was coming from the north, carrying that faint smell of smoke. I started walking. What I didn't know was that everything, the equipment failure, the psychological games, even that conversation, it was all designed to push me in exactly the direction he wanted me to go. I walked for 2 hours through complete darkness, navigating by feel and instinct. My spatial memory was kicking into overdrive, remembering every detail of the terrain I'd covered during the day. When you've spent as much time in the wilderness as I have, you develop an almost supernatural sense of direction. The smoke smell was getting stronger, and I could hear water running somewhere ahead. A creek maybe, or a small river. That's when I saw the first glimmer of light through the trees. A cabin, remote, probably built by hunters or trappers decades ago. Light flickering in the windows, smoke rising from a stone chimney, and tied to a tree out front, a blue Honda Civic with University of Montana parking stickers. Sarah's car. I approached carefully, staying low, using every bit of cover the forest provided. The cabin was small, maybe one room, with a covered porch and what looked like a root cellar entrance on the side. No movement visible through the windows, but the light was steady, probably a generator running. That's when I heard her voice. Please. I already told you everything I know. Sarah Chen. Alive but scared. Very scared. No, Sarah, you haven't. You've told me what you want me to know. There's a difference. The man's voice, calm and patient. Tell me about the senator. What senator? I don't know what you're talking about. The senator whose brother died in that warehouse in Bangkok. The one whose family has been looking for you ever since. A long pause, then Sarah's voice quieter. I didn't know he had a brother. The man I killed. He was torturing girls, selling them. I thought I was saving lives. Oh, you were. That's not the issue. The issue is that Senator Crawford's family doesn't see it that way. They see it as murder, and they've hired me to make sure justice gets done. Senator Crawford. I knew that name from the news. Powerful Republican from Texas, big on defense spending and foreign policy. If his brother had been involved in human trafficking. But here's the thing, Sarah. I don't really give a damn about Senator Crawford or his dead brother. I'm more interested in you, in what you've become since Bangkok. What do you mean? You've gotten very good at disappearing, Sarah. New identity, new life, clean records. That takes skill, connections. The kind of connections that might be useful to someone like me. That's when I understood. This wasn't about revenge or justice. This was recruitment. He wanted to turn Sarah Chen into whatever he'd become. I moved closer to the cabin, trying to get a visual through the windows. The glass was old and warped, but I could make out 2 figures inside. Sarah was tied to a chair near what looked like a wood stove. The man was pacing back and forth, staying mostly out of sight. My phone vibrated. Text message. I know you're there, Ryan. Come in. Door's unlocked. Son of a bitch had been watching me the whole time. I had 2 choices. Walk in and face whatever trap he'd set, or try to create some kind of distraction and get Sarah out. But the cabin was small, isolated, and he obviously knew the terrain better than I did. Plus, Sarah was tied up. Even if I could get to her, we'd never outrun him in the dark. So I walked up to the front door and pushed it open. Ryan Mitchell, the man said without looking up from cleaning what looked like a military issue 45. Right on time. He was maybe 45, medium height, lean build, short gray hair, precise movements, eyes that missed nothing. Everything about him screamed military training, but there was something else, something that reminded me of the career criminals I'd dealt with over the years. Someone who'd crossed a line and never looked back. Sarah looked up at me with a mixture of relief and terror. Mr. Mitchell, how did you... The family hired you. That's right. And I'm here to take you home. The man, I still didn't know his name, smiled. Are you now? That's interesting because Sarah and I were just discussing her options. Tell him, Sarah, tell him what you really are. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. My name is Sarah Chen, but it's also Li Mei Jiang. I worked for the State Department until 18 months ago, deep cover human trafficking investigations in Southeast Asia. And I killed a man in Bangkok who was connected to very powerful people who want me dead. I looked at the man with the gun. And you're here to collect the bounty? Oh no, Ryan. I'm here to offer her a job. You see, Sarah has something very rare, the ability to completely reinvent herself, to become invisible when necessary, visible when useful. Those are valuable skills. What kind of job? He set down the gun and looked directly at me. The same kind I'm offering you, actually. People who've disappeared from the system, who've learned to operate outside official channels. There's a market for that, Ryan, a big one. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about Sarah Chen or Senator Crawford or revenge. This was about recruitment. He'd been watching me, studying my methods, testing my abilities, the whole elaborate chase, the psychological games. It was all an audition. You want me to work for you. I want you to work with me. There's a difference. People go missing every day, Ryan. Some of them want to stay missing. Others need help disappearing. And sometimes people need to be found who don't want to be found. You've got the skills for all three. Sarah was shaking her head. Mr. Mitchell, don't listen to him. He's not who he says he is. Oh, I'm exactly who I say I am. My name is Colonel Marcus Webb, formerly of Delta Force, formerly of a dozen different agencies you've never heard of. And currently, I run a very specialized consulting service. Colonel Marcus Webb. The name meant nothing to me, but Sarah's reaction was immediate and terrified. You're supposed to be dead, she whispered. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, along with my court-martial, my dishonorable discharge, and my federal indictment. Amazing what you can accomplish when you're officially dead. He picked up the gun again, but casually, like it was just something to keep his hands busy. So here's the offer, Ryan. Join my organization. Help people disappear when they need to, find people when necessary. Make more money in a year than you've made in your entire career. And in return, Sarah goes free. Clean identity, clean record, clean slate. And if I say no, then Sarah Chen dies tonight and you'll have a very long walk out of these mountains if you make it at all. I looked at Sarah, tied to that chair, terrified but still defiant. I thought about her family waiting back at park headquarters praying for news. I thought about Linda Chen's voice breaking when she said, "She's all we have." And I made my decision. All right, Webb, you win. I'm in. He smiled and started to relax the gun. That's when I hit him. See, here's the thing about people who've gotten too used to being the smartest person in the room. They stop paying attention to the details. Webb had been so focused on his psychological games, his recruitment pitch, that he'd missed something important. My equipment didn't fail because of sabotage. It failed because I'd switched it all off myself hours ago, when I first realized someone was tracking me electronically. The conversation in the dark forest, I'd been recording it on my backup digital recorder the whole time, and when I'd approached the cabin, I hadn't come alone. The door exploded inward just as I tackled Webb, and suddenly the small cabin was full of FBI agents, park rangers, and local law enforcement. Turned out Peterson had been coordinating with federal agents ever since I'd called in the kidnapping. When I'd gone dark for 2 hours, they'd activated the GPS tracker I carried in my boot. The one Webb didn't know about because it was new tech, just issued to private contractors working federal cases. Webb went down hard, the gun flying across the room. Within seconds he was cuffed and secured, screaming about illegal search and seizure and demanding to talk to his lawyer. Sarah was free, shaken but unharmed. The FBI agents were already processing the scene, finding evidence of Webb's consulting service, fake documents, weapons, detailed files on dozens of missing persons cases. But as they led Webb away, he looked back at me one more time. You have no idea what you've just cost yourself, Mitchell, or what you've cost her. I didn't understand what he meant until 6 months later, when Sarah Chen disappeared again. For real this time. Left a note for her family saying she was sorry, that it was the only way to keep them safe and that they shouldn't try to find her. The FBI investigation revealed that Colonel Marcus Webb had been telling the truth about one thing. There really was a market for his kind of services, and Sarah Chen's real identity, her connection to the Bangkok incident, had been compromised the moment we'd brought Webb in. Senator Crawford's family knew where to find her now, so she'd done the only thing she could do. She'd disappeared again, using skills she'd learned from both the State Department and, apparently, from Marcus Webb himself during those hours in the cabin. The Chens asked me to find her again, but I told them no. Some people don't want to be found, and maybe sometimes that's for the best. But I still think about that night in the cabin, about Webb's offer, and what he'd said about Sarah having the ability to completely reinvent herself. Because the truth is, we all do that to some degree. We all become different people based on what life throws at us. I learned something about myself that night too. I learned that there's a difference between finding someone who's lost and finding someone who's hiding. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let them stay hidden. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and that's the story of the worst damn week of my life. But also maybe the week that taught me the most about what it really means to disappear, and what it costs to come back. My name is Matt Thompson, and I'm gonna tell you about the worst damn case of my life. Now, I've been through some shit in my 34 years, spent 8 years as a forest ranger before going private, and I've seen things out there that'd make your skin crawl. But what happened in Olympic National Park back in October 2008? Hell, that still wakes me up in cold sweats. See, I just started working as a private investigator specializing in wilderness cases. The economy was going straight to hell that year. You remember 2008, right? Banks failing, people losing their houses, everyone scared about money. Well, desperate times meant desperate people were willing to pay good money for someone who could find their missing loved ones when the official search and rescue teams came up empty. And I had a reputation for finding people others couldn't. That's 'cause I've got what you might call enhanced abilities. Nothing supernatural, mind you, just skills I'd developed over years in the wilderness. I could track better than anyone, find footprints others missed, read signs in broken twigs and disturbed leaves that told whole stories. I could sense when animals were acting wrong, when the forest itself was trying to warn you about something. And I had this thing where I could feel when someone was watching me, like a sixth sense that had kept me alive more times than I care to count. But what happened that October tested every damn ability I had, and then some. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning. I was in my little office in Port Angeles, nursing my third cup of coffee, and trying not to think about my dwindling bank account, when the phone rang. The voice on the other end, Jesus, I'll never forget how broken it sounded. Mr. Thompson, this is David Chen. My wife is missing, and I don't know what else to do. Now, I'd gotten plenty of desperate calls before, but there was something in this man's voice that hit me right in the gut. Raw terror mixed with exhaustion, like he hadn't slept in days, which, as it turned out, he hadn't. Tell me what happened, I said, already reaching for my notepad. Sarah went into Olympic National Park 3 days ago. She's a marine biologist, studying old-growth forest ecosystems near the Ho River. She was supposed to check in every 12 hours, but his voice cracked. The last call was Saturday morning. It's Tuesday now and nobody's seen her. 3 days. In the wilderness, after 72 hours, your chances of finding someone alive drop to almost nothing. But I didn't tell him that. The Park Service is searching, David continued, but they said they might have to scale back operations if they don't find anything soon. Mr. Thompson, I've got a 6-year-old daughter who keeps asking where her mommy is, and I can't tell her I don't know. That's when I heard it in the background, a little girl's voice calling, Daddy, when is mommy coming home? And something inside me just broke wide open. I'll take the case, I said. Send me everything you have, photos, her research notes, GPS coordinates, everything. I'll head up there today. After I hung up, I sat there for a minute, staring at the phone. See, missing persons cases in the wilderness, they don't usually have happy endings, especially when someone's been gone that long. But the way that little girl sounded asking for her mommy, hell, I had to try. David emailed me everything within an hour. Sarah Chen, 28 years old, PhD in marine biology from University of Washington. Beautiful woman with long black hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd been researching the interaction between old-growth forests and salmon-spawning habitats, working on some grant-funded project that had her camping alone in remote areas. Her last known position was near a tributary of the Ho River, about 15 miles from the nearest trailhead. Rough country, dense forest, steep ravines, and dozens of places where someone could disappear forever. The Park Service had done aerial searches and sent ground teams to the obvious locations, but they were working with limited resources and standard protocols. Me? I don't follow standard protocols. I loaded up my truck that afternoon with enough gear for a week. My GPS unit, one of those new Garmin models that actually worked pretty well if you could get satellite coverage, digital camera with extra memory cards, emergency radio, though coverage was spotty at best in that part of the park, food, water, medical supplies, and my grandfather's old Winchester 3030 that had been with me on every wilderness job I'd taken. The drive up to the Olympic Peninsula took 3 hours, and with every mile, I kept thinking about that little girl asking for her mommy. David had sent me a photo of the family, Sarah laughing while Emma sat on her shoulders, both of them making silly faces at the camera. Normal people living a normal life until 3 days ago when normal just stopped. I reached the trailhead just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. October in the Olympics is beautiful but dangerous. The leaves were turning gold and red, but the weather could shift from clear to deadly in minutes. Temperature drops fast after dark, and if Sarah was hurt somewhere out there, well, I tried not to think about that as I shouldered my pack and started into the forest. The first thing I noticed was wrong was the silence. Now I've spent enough time in the woods to know what normal sounds like. Evening bird calls, small animals rustling through the underbrush, the distant sound of water running over rocks. But as I hiked toward Sarah's last known position, the forest felt empty, like everything with sense had cleared out of the area. That should have been my first warning that this wasn't going to be a normal missing person case. I made good time on the established trails, using my headlamp once full darkness hit. The temperature was dropping fast, probably down to the 40s already, and it'd keep falling all night. If Sarah was out here without proper gear, hypothermia would be a serious concern. But her equipment list showed she knew what she was doing. Quality sleeping bag, waterproof clothing, emergency shelter. So why hadn't she made contact? I reached her base camp around 10 p.m., and that's when I knew for sure something was very, very wrong. Her tent was still set up, guy lines tight and stakes properly placed, but the tent flap was open and her sleeping bag was pulled halfway out like she'd left in a hurry. Her research equipment was scattered around the campsite, notebooks, water samples, expensive scientific instruments just left lying in the dirt. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold. Her boots were still by the tent entrance. Nobody goes walking around the Olympic wilderness barefoot, especially not at night, which meant either Sarah had left her camp under extreme duress or I circled the campsite with my flashlight looking for tracks, and that's when my tracking abilities kicked into high gear. Most people would have seen scuffed dirt and maybe some footprints leading away from the camp, but I could read the story written in the disturbed earth like it was a book. 2 sets of prints, Sarah's hiking boots heading toward the river, but the stride was wrong. Too long, too erratic, like she was being forced to move faster than comfortable. And beside her tracks, something that made my skin crawl. Smooth-soled dress shoes. Not hiking boots, not trail runners, but actual leather dress shoes with a distinctive wear pattern on the left heel. What kind of person wears dress shoes into the wilderness? The kind who doesn't plan to be walking much, I realized. The kind who brings people to him. I followed the trail for about 50 yards before it reached a rocky outcrop where the tracks disappeared. But even in the dark, I could see broken branches at eye level. Someone had passed through here recently, and they'd been moving Sarah along with them. That's when my satellite phone rang, nearly giving me a heart attack. "Mr. Thompson?" David's voice sounded even more desperate than before. Have you found anything? I looked at Sarah's campsite behind me, then at the broken branches ahead. How do you tell a husband and father that his wife was almost certainly taken by someone who'd planned this whole thing? I'm at her camp now, I said carefully. I found some tracks. I'm gonna follow them in the morning when I can see better. But she could still be okay, right? I mean, if someone has her. David, listen to me. I need you to call the FBI. Tell them this isn't a missing person case anymore, it's an abduction. And I need you to think hard about whether Sarah mentioned anyone bothering her lately. Anyone who seemed too interested in her work, asked too many questions, anything like that. Silence on the other end, then. There was, maybe 3 weeks ago, she said some guy had been asking questions at the university. Wanted to know about her research schedule, where she was planning to go. She thought he was another scientist at first, but then he started asking personal stuff. If she was married, if she had kids. Made her uncomfortable. My stomach dropped. Did she get a name, description? She said he was maybe 40, 45, tall, thin, wore glasses, well-dressed but kind of intense, like he was studying her while she talked. Sarah said it creeped her out. 45. Intelligent enough to track down a PhD researcher. Methodical enough to plan an abduction in the wilderness. This was getting worse by the minute. David, call the FBI now. Tell them everything. I'm gonna keep following this trail. Mr. Thompson, please bring her home. Emma asked me again tonight when Mommy was coming back, and I don't know what to tell her anymore. I closed my eyes, seeing that photo again. Sarah and Emma laughing together, completely unaware that in 3 weeks their world would shatter. I'll bring her home, I said, and hoped to God I wasn't lying. After I hung up, I made camp about 100 yards from Sarah's site, close enough to keep an eye on things, far enough away that I wouldn't contaminate any more evidence. As I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the stars through the forest canopy, I tried to piece together what I knew. Someone had been watching Sarah, studying her routine, learning her schedule. He'd approached her at the university. Bold move, but it told me he was confident, probably charming when he needed to be. And he'd managed to take her from her campsite without a struggle loud enough to alert other campers or wildlife. That suggested either surprise or coercion. Maybe both. But the dress shoes bothered me most of all. They suggested someone who was playing a role, putting on a performance, like this whole thing was theater to him. I should have paid more attention to that thought because it would have prepared me for what was coming. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost covering everything like a crystalline blanket. I was up before sunrise, partly because of habit and partly because I'd been thinking all night about Emma Chen asking where her mommy was. I spent the first hour documenting Sarah's campsite with my camera, taking shots of the scattered equipment, the open tent, and especially those tracks leading toward the river. The FBI would want everything when they got here, but I wasn't waiting for federal bureaucracy to catch up. Following the trail in daylight revealed more disturbing details. The dress shoe prints were deeper in some places, suggesting their owner was carrying extra weight, probably Sarah's research equipment. But why take it? What would a kidnapper want with water samples and forest ecosystem data? The trail led down to the river, then followed the bank upstream for about a mile. Rough going through thick underbrush and overfallen logs, but someone had definitely passed this way recently. Broken twigs, disturbed moss, even a few threads of fabric caught on thorny bushes. But here's where my abilities really started kicking in. I could sense wrongness in the forest around me. The birds weren't calling like they should, and I hadn't seen a single deer track crossing the path. It was like the local wildlife was avoiding this whole area. Animals know things. They can sense danger, predators, death, and they were telling me to turn around and get the hell out of here. Too bad I've never been good at listening to sensible advice. The trail ended at a rocky clearing beside a deep pool in the river, and that's where I found Sarah's research notebook, waterlogged and caught in the roots of a fallen tree. I fished it out carefully, most of the pages ruined by water damage, but I could make out fragments of her handwriting on some of the pages that were still legible. Notes about salmon spawning patterns, water temperature readings, GPS coordinates. And on the last page she'd written in handwriting that looked rushed and scared, "Someone's been watching me. Found footprints around camp this morning. Not hiking boots, dress shoes. Who wears dress shoes in the wilderness?" My blood went cold as I read those words. Sarah had known she was being stalked. She'd been scared, probably planning to pack up and leave early, but he'd gotten to her before she could escape. That's when I heard it, the sound of a branch snapping somewhere behind me in the forest. I spun around, hand automatically moving to the rifle across my back, but the woods were silent again, just the sound of water running over rocks and wind moving through the trees. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish but needing to know. "Anyone out there?" Nothing. But I had that feeling again, the sensation of being watched by hostile eyes. My grandfather used to say that feeling had kept him alive in Korea, and it had kept me alive in some tight spots over the years. Someone was out there, someone who'd been tracking me just like I'd been tracking him. I started back toward the main trail, moving faster than before, but I'd only gone about 50 yards when I found something that stopped me cold. A small pile of stones arranged in a perfect cairn right in the middle of the path. Cairns are trail markers used by hikers to mark routes or important locations. But this one wasn't marking anything. It was blocking the path I'd just taken, like someone was telling me I couldn't go back the way I'd come. And beside the cairn, pressed into the soft earth, was a fresh footprint. Dress shoe with that distinctive wear pattern on the left heel. He'd been right behind me while I was examining Sarah's notebook, close enough to touch me, close enough to... That's when I realized this wasn't just an abduction. This was a game, and I was losing. I grabbed my satellite phone and tried to call David, then the FBI, then anyone who might answer, but I couldn't get a signal, something I'd never experienced in this part of the park before. The GPS unit was acting up too, showing my location jumping around like I was teleporting through the forest. Electronic interference. Someone with the right equipment could jam GPS and sell signals, but it took sophisticated gear and technical knowledge. Our dress shoe-wearing kidnapper was more than just a predator. He was intelligent, well-equipped, and he'd been planning this for a long time. I followed the river upstream, hoping to get above the interference zone and re-establish communication. But every few hundred yards, I'd find another cairn blocking the path, forcing me to detour deeper into the wilderness. It was like being herded, like a rancher driving cattle toward a pen. That's when I started getting angry instead of scared. See, I'd been through some bad situations before. Got lost in a blizzard up in Glacier National Park. Had a run-in with a meth lab operation in the Cascades that nearly got me killed. But I'd always found a way out because I trusted my abilities and kept my head clear. This son of a bitch was trying to play mind games with me, make me panic and make mistakes. But he'd picked the wrong guy to mess with. I decided to stop playing his game and start playing my own. Instead of following the river where he obviously wanted me to go, I cut straight up the ridge using my natural orientation skills to navigate by the sun and terrain features. If he wanted to track me, he was going to have to work for it. The climb was brutal, steep, rocky terrain covered with thick underbrush that grabbed at my pack and clothes. But I made good time, and after an hour of hard hiking, I reached a rocky outcrop that gave me a clear view of the valley below. And that's where I saw them. About a half-mile downstream, there was a small clearing beside the river. I could see a blue tarp stretched between trees, some kind of temporary shelter. And moving around the camp, two figures. One tall and thin, wearing what looked like a dark jacket, and one smaller, shorter. Sarah. She was alive. I pulled out my binoculars and focused on the camp. The tall figure was definitely a man, probably in his 40s like David had described. Even from this distance, I could see he moved with confidence, like someone completely comfortable in the wilderness despite his inappropriate footwear. Sarah was sitting near the tarp shelter, and she appeared to be unrestrained. But she wasn't moving around much, and something about her posture looked wrong. Slumped, defeated, drugged maybe, or just exhausted from fear and captivity. The man seemed to be talking to her, gesturing with his hands like he was giving a lecture. Even from a distance, there was something unsettling about the way he moved. Too controlled, too precise, like every gesture was calculated. I needed to get closer, but the approach was all open ground beside the river. No way to get within 100 yards without being seen, and I still didn't know if he was armed, though I had to assume he was. That's when my satellite phone suddenly came to life with a burst of static, then David's voice. "Mr. Thompson? Mr. Thompson, are you there?" The signal was weak and broken, but I could hear the desperation in his voice. I keyed the mic. "David, I can see Sarah. She's alive, about half a mile from my position. I'm going to try to get to her, but I need you to contact the FBI and tell them my GPS coordinates are..." I read off the numbers from my unit. "Send them upstream from Sarah's original campsite." Is she okay?" I looked through the binoculars again. Sarah was still sitting in the same position, but now the man was crouched beside her, his hand on her shoulder in a way that made my skin crawl. "I don't know yet. But David, listen to me. This guy is smart and he's planned this whole thing. He's been jamming communications and GPS signals. Tell the FBI they're dealing with someone with technical capabilities." "Mr. Thompson," David's voice was breaking up, but I could hear the tears. "Just please bring her home to Emma, please." The signal cut to static, then died completely. I was on my own again. I spent another hour watching the camp, trying to figure out the best approach. The man, I'd started thinking of him as the professor, based on David's description, seemed to be following some kind of routine. Every 20 minutes or so, he'd walk a circuit around the clearing, checking the perimeter like he was expecting company. Smart, professional. This wasn't his first time. That thought sent ice through my veins. How many others had there been? How many other Sarah Chens had disappeared into the wilderness with this monster? But I couldn't think about that now. I had one job: get Sarah away from him and get her home to her family. I started working my way down the ridge, using every bit of cover I could find. The afternoon light was starting to fade, which would work in my favor, but it also meant the temperature would drop fast once the sun disappeared behind the mountains. I was about halfway to the camp when everything went to hell. My foot slipped on a loose rock, sending a small avalanche of stones tumbling down the hillside. In the forest quiet, it sounded like a freight train. I froze, hoping he hadn't heard, but when I looked toward the camp through my binoculars, the professor was standing at the edge of the clearing, staring straight up at my position. Even from 200 yards away, I could see him smile. He'd been waiting for me. This whole thing, the trail of clues, the electronic jamming, the carefully placed cairns, it had all been designed to bring me to this exact spot at this exact time. The professor raised something to his mouth, a radio or megaphone, and his voice echoed across the valley. "Mr. Thompson, so glad you could join us. Please come down to the camp. We have so much to discuss." His voice was cultured, educated, with just a hint of accent I couldn't place. And there was something in his tone, amusement, like this was all a delightful game to him. "Sarah is quite eager to see you," he continued. "Aren't you, Sarah?" I heard a woman's voice, faint but unmistakably terrified. Matt, don't come down here. He's got a gun and he's not right in the head. Just go get help." The professor's laughter drifted across the clearing. "Oh, but Sarah, that would spoil all the fun. You see, Mr. Thompson, I've been studying your work for quite some time. Your success rate in wilderness recovery cases is really quite impressive. I was curious to see how you'd handle a more challenging scenario." Studying my work? This wasn't random. I'd been targeted just as much as Sarah. "What do you want?" I shouted back. "An intellectual conversation, nothing more. You see, Sarah and I have been discussing the fascinating intersection of predator-prey relationships in both human and animal populations. I thought you might have some insights to contribute, given your unique skill set." The sick bastard was talking about kidnapping and murder like it was a research project. "Let her go," I called out. "Your problem is with me, not her." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong. Sarah is integral to our little experiment. You see, I needed something to motivate you, to push you beyond your normal capabilities. The threat to an innocent life tends to bring out the very best in people like you." People like me. What the hell did that mean? "I've read about your previous cases, Mr. Thompson. The lost hikers in Glacier, the missing children in the Cascades, that unfortunate business with the drug runners in Mount Baker. Each time, you succeeded when others failed. I'm curious to discover what happens when you face an opponent who's prepared specifically for your particular talents. My blood went cold. He knew about the drug runners, information that had never been released to the public, which meant he had access to law enforcement databases or contacts inside the system. Come down to the camp, Mr. Thompson. Come alone and Sarah remains unharmed. Try to call for backup or attempt some sort of tactical approach, and I'm afraid our conversation will end rather abruptly. I could see him standing beside Sarah now, one hand resting on her shoulder. Even from this distance, I could see she was trembling. I had a choice to make. Wait for the FBI to arrive, if they could even find us in this wilderness maze, or go down there and face whatever this psychopath had planned. But looking at Sarah through my binoculars, seeing the terror in her posture, thinking about little Emma asking where her mommy was, there really wasn't a choice at all. "I'm coming down," I shouted. "But I swear to God, if you hurt her..." "Threats, Mr. Thompson? I'm disappointed. I thought we'd have a more civilized discussion." I started down the hill, rifle in hand but not aimed. I needed to get close enough to assess the situation, figure out his capabilities, look for weaknesses. The professor watched me approach with what looked like genuine curiosity, like I was a fascinating specimen he was studying. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I got my first close look at him. David's description had been accurate. Mid-40s, tall and thin, wire-rimmed glasses. But what struck me most was how normal he looked. If I'd passed him on the street, I would have pegged him for a college professor or maybe a librarian, which I realized was probably exactly what he used to be. "Please set your rifle down," he said conversationally. "I appreciate the caution, but we're going to be having a discussion, not a gunfight." I could see his weapon now. A pistol in a shoulder holster, partially concealed under his jacket. Military-style holster, suggesting training or at least serious preparation. "Sarah," I called out, "are you hurt?" She looked up at me and I could see she'd been crying, but her eyes were clear, alert. Whatever he'd done to her, he hadn't drugged her into unconsciousness. "I'm okay," she said, voice shaky but strong. "Matt, he's been talking about you for hours. He knows things, personal things, about your family, your cases, even your military service. This isn't random." The professor smiled approvingly. "Very good, Sarah. Yes, Mr. Thompson. I've done my research. 8 years Army infantry, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Discharged after taking shrapnel in an IED blast. Still carry some fragments in your left leg, which explains the slight limp when you're tired. Became a forest ranger after your discharge. Excellent service record until you went private last year." He knew details that weren't in any public record. This was looking worse by the minute. "What I found most interesting," he continued, "was your psychological profile from the Army. Exceptional spatial awareness, enhanced pattern recognition, what the evaluators called intuitive navigation abilities. They recommended you for special operations training, but you turned it down. Why was that?" I didn't answer. Let him do the talking while I figured out how to get Sarah away from him. "I suspect it was because you'd already seen enough killing," he said thoughtfully. "Am I right? You preferred to save lives rather than take them. Admirable, really. It's what makes you perfect for my purposes." "What purposes?" "A test, Mr. Thompson. A validation of certain theories I've been developing about human behavior under extreme stress. You see, I used to teach psychology at the University of Washington until certain disagreements with the administration led to my departure. Fired, more likely. Probably for exactly the kind of sick research he was describing. I've spent the last 3 years developing a new understanding of predator-prey dynamics in human populations. Sarah here has been kind enough to serve as a test subject, haven't you, Sarah?" Sarah was staring at him with undisguised horror. "You're insane," she whispered. "Insane?" The professor looked genuinely hurt. "My dear, I'm conducting groundbreaking research into the fundamental nature of human survival instincts. You should feel honored to be part of something so revolutionary. That's when I realized the true scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a kidnapper or even a serial killer. This was someone who'd constructed an elaborate rationalization for his crimes, who genuinely believed he was doing important work. The most dangerous kind of predator, the kind who thinks he's the hero of his own story. "So what's the test?" I asked, trying to keep him talking while I looked for advantages. "Simple. I've created a scenario designed to push you beyond your normal capabilities. Sarah will be released in a location of my choosing, and you'll have until sunrise to find her. If you succeed, you both go free. If you fail..." He shrugged. "Well, let's just say the research will be concluded. And you expect me to just trust you?" "Trust?" He laughed. "Oh no, Mr. Thompson. This isn't about trust. This is about intellectual curiosity. I want to see what happens when someone with your particular abilities faces an impossible challenge." He gestured toward the darkening forest around us. Olympic National Park covers nearly 1 million acres of wilderness. Sarah could be anywhere within a 50-mile radius. You'll have no electronic assistance. I'll be maintaining a jamming field throughout the exercise. No backup, no support, just your wits and whatever skills you possess. I looked at Sarah, trying to read her expression. She was scared, but I could see something else in her eyes. Determination. She wasn't giving up, which meant I couldn't either. "What makes you think I won't just put a bullet in you right now?" I asked. "Because you're not a killer, Mr. Thompson. Your psychological profile makes that quite clear. And besides..." He pulled out a small device that looked like a garage door opener. "Sarah is wearing a small explosive device. If my heart stops beating, or if I don't enter a code every hour, the device activates. The charge is small, not enough to kill her outright, but more than sufficient to ensure she bleeds to death before you could get her to medical assistance." My blood ran cold. This sick bastard had thought of everything. "Of course," he continued, "if you complete the challenge successfully, I'll gladly remove the device and send you both on your way with my compliments." "Matt," Sarah said quietly, "don't do this. Just shoot him and take your chances. I'd rather die fighting than let this monster..." "Sarah, please," the professor interrupted. "Let's maintain some civility. Mr. Thompson has a decision to make, and I'm sure he'll make the right choice." I stared at him, trying to read his intentions. Everything about this screamed trap, but what choice did I have? If I tried to take him down, Sarah died. If I refused to play his game, Sarah died. The only option that kept her alive was to trust that his twisted sense of intellectual curiosity would override his homicidal impulses. "All right," I said finally. "I'll play your game. But I want proof that device you're talking about actually exists." The professor smiled and pressed a button on his remote. Immediately, Sarah cried out and doubled over, clutching her side. The bastard had given her an electric shock to demonstrate the device's functionality. "Satisfied?" he asked. I wanted to tear his throat out with my bare hands. But Sarah was looking at me with trust in her eyes, believing I could somehow get her out of this nightmare. "What are the rules?" I asked through gritted teeth. "Simple. Sarah will be released at a location of my choosing. You'll have from sunset today until sunrise tomorrow, roughly 10 hours, to find her and disable the device using a code I'll provide when you succeed. The device itself is quite small and has been surgically implanted, so don't waste time trying to remove it manually." Surgically implanted, this monster was even more prepared than I'd imagined. "If you haven't found her by sunrise, or if you attempt to leave the designated search area, the device activates. The search boundary is roughly a 10-mile radius from this location, marked with reflective tape on trees. Cross the boundary, and Sarah dies. 10 miles in any direction meant roughly 300 square miles of wilderness. Dense forest, steep terrain, countless hiding places. It was an impossible task, which was exactly the point. "One more thing," the professor added. "To make this interesting, I'll be hunting you throughout the night. Nothing lethal, I wouldn't want to end the experiment prematurely. But I may provide additional incentives to keep you focused." He was going to be stalking me while I tried to find Sarah. Jesus Christ. Do we have an agreement, Mr. Thompson? I looked at Sarah one more time, seeing her terror but also her faith that somehow I'd find a way to save her. Then I thought about Emma Chen, asking when Mommy was coming home. We have an agreement, I said. The professor clapped his hands together like a delighted child. Excellent. The experiment begins at sunset, which is... He checked his watch. In approximately 30 minutes. I suggest you use that time to prepare. As the last light faded from the western sky, I watched the professor lead Sarah away into the forest. My rifle, GPS unit, and satellite phone were now in his possession, leaving me with just basic survival gear and whatever skills I could muster. The hunt was about to begin, and for the first time in my career I wasn't sure I could win, but I was damn sure gonna try. The first 2 hours were the worst of my life. I'd started tracking immediately after the professor disappeared with Sarah, but he was smarter than I'd given him credit for. Instead of leaving an obvious trail to follow, he'd taken her along the rocky sections of the riverbank where footprints were impossible to detect. I'd found traces, a broken twig here, a scuff mark on a boulder there, but nothing that gave me a clear direction, and all the while, I could feel time slipping away like sand through my fingers. Every hour that passed brought Sarah closer to death. But worse than that, I kept thinking about Emma Chen, probably lying awake in her bed right now, wondering why Mommy hadn't called to say goodnight. That's when the mind games started. I was following what I thought might be a trail along the riverbank when I heard a sound that froze my blood. A woman screaming. High-pitched, terrified, echoing through the forest from somewhere ahead of me. Sarah. I ran toward the sound, crashing through underbrush and stumbling over fallen logs in the darkness. But when I reached the area where the scream had come from, there was nothing. No tracks, no signs of disturbance. Nothing. Then I heard it again, this time from behind me. Same scream, same terror. It took me a few more repetitions to realize what was happening. The professor was using some kind of electronic device to play recorded sounds, drawing me in different directions, wasting precious time. Very good, Mr. Thompson. His voice suddenly echoed through the darkness. He was using some kind of PA system, speakers hidden in the forest. You're learning, though I'm afraid you've lost nearly an hour chasing shadows. I stood still, trying to control my breathing and think clearly. He was right. I'd been reacting instead of thinking, letting emotion override tactical sense. That's exactly what he wanted. Time to change tactics. Instead of chasing sounds and false trails, I started using my real abilities. I'd spent 8 years in these forests, learning to read signs that others missed. I knew how animals moved through this terrain, how water flowed, how wind patterns worked. The professor was smart, but he was still human. He'd make mistakes. I found the first one about a half-mile upstream, a footprint in soft mud beside the river, partially hidden under a fallen leaf. But the mud was fresh, probably less than an hour old, and the print showed the same distinctive wear pattern I'd been tracking all day. More importantly, there was a second print beside it, smaller, lighter, with the tread pattern of hiking boots. Sarah's boots. Now you're thinking, I whispered to myself, feeling the first spark of hope since this nightmare began. I followed the trail more carefully now, using my flashlight sparingly and relying on my other senses. The professor was confident, maybe overconfident, and he'd started leaving more obvious traces as he moved through the forest. Broken branches at shoulder height, disturbed moss on boulders. Even what looked like a piece of fabric from Sarah's jacket caught on a thorn bush. But something about the trail bothered me. It was almost too easy to follow, like he wanted me to find it. That's when I realized what was really happening. This wasn't the trail to where he'd hidden Sarah. This was him leading me somewhere else entirely. Somewhere he wanted me to be. I stopped following the false trail and started thinking like a predator instead of prey. If I were the professor, where would I hide someone I wanted to keep secure but still accessible? Somewhere close enough to monitor, but isolated enough that screams wouldn't carry to potential rescuers. The old mine shafts. I'd studied the topographic maps of this area during my ranger days. There were several abandoned mining claims scattered throughout this part of the park, dating back to the early 1900s. Most were just shallow excavations, but a few had actual tunnels extending back into the hillsides. Perfect hiding places for someone who wanted to keep a victim secure. I abandoned the false trail and started climbing toward the ridge where I remembered seeing mining symbols on the old maps. It was rough going in the darkness, but I made good time by following game trails that switchbacked up the steep slope. That's when my enhanced senses started picking up something that made my heart race, the faint sound of human breathing echoing from somewhere underground. I'd found her. The mine entrance was partially concealed behind a screen of brush, probably planted by the professor to hide his base of operations. But I could see artificial light filtering through the vegetation, some kind of battery-powered lantern or LED setup. I crept closer, trying to assess the situation before making my move. Through gaps in the brush, I could see into the mine tunnel. Sarah was there, about 20 feet back from the entrance, tied to a support timber with climbing rope. But she wasn't alone. The professor was sitting across from her on a folding camp chair, reading from what looked like a journal or notebook. Even from outside, I could hear his voice echoing off the tunnel walls. Fascinating how the human mind adapts to extreme stress. Your heart rate has stabilized significantly since we arrived here, suggesting psychological adjustment to your circumstances. Of course, that could change rapidly when Mr. Thompson arrives. He knew I was coming. Hell, he was probably counting on it. The question, he continued, is whether he'll attempt a direct assault or try something more creative. Based on his psychological profile, I'd expect the latter. He's not a soldier anymore, despite his training. He's a protector, which means he'll prioritize your safety over tactical advantage. Sarah's voice was weak but defiant. You don't know him. Matt's survived things that would have killed other men. He'll find a way. Oh, I certainly hope so, the professor replied. It would be terribly disappointing if this ended too easily. I needed to get closer, figure out his defensive preparations, look for weaknesses in his setup. But as I started moving through the brush, my foot caught on something that sent up a sharp metallic clang. Tripwire attached to some kind of makeshift alarm system. Ah, the professor's voice drifted from the tunnel. Right on schedule. Please come in, Mr. Thompson. Sarah and I have been having the most interesting conversation about you. I was blown. No point in stealth now. Let her go, I called out. You've got what you wanted. You proved your point. Have I? The night is still young and I haven't seen anything particularly extraordinary yet. Please join us. I promise you'll find our discussion illuminating. I could see him now, still sitting calmly in his chair like he was hosting a dinner party instead of holding a woman hostage in an abandoned mine shaft. The arrogance was staggering, but it was also his weakness. See? Guys like the professor, they need to feel superior. They need to explain their brilliance to make sure everyone understands how clever they are. It's a compulsion they can't resist, and compulsions can be exploited. All right, I called out. I'm coming in, but I want to see the device first. Proof that it's real and not just another mind game. Skeptical to the end. Very well. He stood up and moved behind Sarah, lifting her shirt to reveal a small bandage on her lower back. Underneath, I could see the outline of something about the size of a pager attached directly to her skin. Surgical adhesive, he explained. Quite secure, I'm afraid. Any attempt to remove it forcibly would likely trigger the detonation mechanism. He wasn't bluffing. The device was real, and Sarah was as good as dead if I made any mistakes. Now then, the professor said, settling back into his chair. Let's discuss your performance so far. I must say, I'm somewhat disappointed. Yes, you eventually found this location, but it took far longer than I'd anticipated. Your legendary tracking abilities seem somewhat overstated. He was trying to provoke me, make me angry, so I'd make mistakes. Classic psychological manipulation. What do you want me to say? I replied, stepping slowly into the tunnel. You got me. You're smarter than me. Congratulations. Oh, but that's not what I want to hear at all. He leaned forward, eyes bright with interest. What I want to know is why you haven't used your real abilities yet. My real abilities? Please, Mr. Thompson. I've studied your case files extensively. The lost hikers you found after search and rescue teams had given up. The children you located in terrain that other trackers said was impossible to navigate. The drug runners you hunted through conditions that should have been lethal. He stood up and began pacing, warming to his subject like a professor giving a lecture. Each time witnesses described your performance as unusual, enhanced, as if you possessed capabilities that went beyond normal human limitations. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I was reeling. He was talking about things I'd never discussed with anyone, abilities I'd kept hidden because they sounded too weird to explain. The enhanced pattern recognition that allows you to see trails others can't detect. The spatial awareness that lets you navigate without instruments. The almost supernatural ability to sense when you're being watched or when danger is near. He stopped pacing and stared directly at me. I want to see what happens when those abilities are pushed to their absolute limit. When normal human capabilities aren't sufficient, and you're forced to tap into whatever it is that makes you extraordinary. That's when I understood what this was really about. He hadn't kidnapped Sarah to hurt her. She was just bait. This whole elaborate scenario was designed to push me past my breaking point, to force me to use abilities I'd kept hidden for years. He wanted to study me like a lab rat. You're insane, I said. Am I? Tell me, Mr. Thompson. Have you ever wondered why you can do things others can't? Have you ever questioned the source of your gifts? I had wondered, actually, late at night, lying awake after another impossible rescue, trying to figure out how I'd known which direction to go when all logic said I was lost. But I'd always pushed those thoughts away, filed them under just lucky or good instincts. What if I told you, the professor continued, that you're part of something larger, a genetic variation that appears in roughly 1 in 10,000 humans, enhanced spatial processing, heightened environmental awareness, what some researchers call wilderness telepathy. Wilderness telepathy. That was a phrase I'd never heard before, but it sent chills down my spine because it described exactly what I'd experienced in the field. You're lying, I said. But even as I said it, I could feel doubt creeping in. Am I? Then explain how you found this location. You abandoned the trail I left for you, a trail that would have led you in circles until sunrise. Instead, you came directly here, to a place you'd never been before, following nothing but intuition. He was right. I had no logical explanation for how I'd known to check the mining claims. It had just felt right. The question, the professor said, moving closer to Sarah, is whether that intuition is strong enough to save her life. That's when everything went to hell. The professor pulled out a second remote control, different from the one he'd used to shock Sarah earlier. This one had a small digital display showing numbers counting down. I'm afraid our conversation has taken longer than anticipated, he said apologetically. Dawn is only 3 hours away, and I really must see your abilities pushed to their maximum potential. He pressed a button and Sarah screamed as electricity coursed through the device on her back. Stop! I lunged forward, but he held up the remote. The device is now on a timer, he said calmly. Sarah will receive increasingly powerful electrical shocks every 10 minutes until either the timer reaches 0 at sunrise, or you provide me with the demonstration I require. What demonstration? I was fighting to keep my voice steady, but inside I was screaming. Find her! Before I could react, the tunnel filled with smoke, some kind of military-grade smoke grenade that turned the air opaque in seconds. I heard movement, footsteps, Sarah's voice crying out in pain and fear. When the smoke cleared 30 seconds later, they were both gone. I was alone in an empty mine shaft, with Sarah's agonized scream echoing in my memory, and less than 3 hours to find her before the device killed her. But now I knew what the professor wanted. He wanted to see my abilities pushed to their limit. Time to give him what he asked for. I stood in that empty tunnel for exactly 10 seconds, letting rage and desperation wash through me like a cleansing fire. Then I did something I'd never done before. I stopped fighting my instincts and let them take complete control. The change was immediate and overwhelming. My vision sharpened until I could see details in the darkness that shouldn't have been visible. The faint scuff marks on the tunnel floor where they'd dragged Sarah became as clear as highway signs. The lingering scent of the professor's cologne hung in the air like a visible trail, and underneath it all I could sense Sarah herself. Her fear, her pain, her desperate hope that I'd find her in time. I followed the trail out of the mine and into the forest, moving faster than I'd ever moved before. Every broken twig, every disturbed leaf, every molecule of scent told me a story about their passage. The professor was carrying Sarah now. Her footprints had disappeared, replaced by his deeper impressions showing the extra weight. He was heading uphill, toward the ridgeline, carrying an unconscious woman through rough terrain. He'd have to rest every few hundred yards. That would slow him down, give me a chance to catch up. But I had to hurry. Every 10 minutes, that device would send another shock through Sarah's body, each one stronger than the last. At some point, her heart would give out. I found the first rest spot about a quarter-mile from the mine, a fallen log where he'd set Sarah down for a moment. Her scent was stronger here, mixed with fear sweat and something else. Blood. The device was already causing tissue damage. "Enjoying the chase, Mr. Thompson?" The professor's voice echoed through the forest from hidden speakers. "I must say, you're moving much faster than anticipated. Most impressive." I ignored him and kept tracking. The trail led up a steep ravine, over a rocky outcrop, then down toward a small creek. Difficult terrain, but he was managing it somehow. That's when I realized he'd been scouting this route for weeks, maybe months. Every rest stop, every path, every hiding place had been carefully selected. This wasn't improvisation. This was the execution of a detailed plan. But plans have weaknesses. They depend on everything going exactly as expected. Time to introduce some chaos. Instead of following his trail directly, I started using my enhanced abilities to predict where he was going. The terrain dictated his options. There were only so many paths through this section of forest that would allow someone carrying a human burden. I cut across country, following game trails and creek beds, using my supernatural navigation sense to intercept his route instead of following behind him. It was risky. If I guessed wrong, I'd lose the trail entirely. But if I was right, I found them at the third location I checked, a small clearing beside a seasonal waterfall, maybe 2 miles from the mine. The professor was there, setting up another of his elaborate psychological torture devices while Sarah lay unconscious nearby. From my hiding place in the brush, I could see the device on her back was blinking more rapidly now. Whatever countdown timer he'd activated, it was accelerating, but I could also see something that gave me hope. Sarah was breathing regularly and her color looked good. She was unconscious, but she wasn't dying. Yet. The professor finished his setup, some kind of motion sensor array connected to speakers, and checked his watch. "Excellent timing," he called out to the forest. "Right on schedule. I do so appreciate punctuality." He knew I was here. Somehow he'd predicted I'd take the shortcut and intercept his route instead of following behind him. "Please join us, Mr. Thompson. Sarah is about to receive her next treatment, and I thought you might want to observe." I had no choice. If I stayed hidden, Sarah would die. If I revealed myself, I'd be walking into whatever trap he'd prepared. But maybe that's exactly what I needed to do. "I'm here," I called out, stepping into the clearing. "You got what you wanted. You've seen my abilities. Now let her go." "Let her go?" The professor looked genuinely puzzled. "But Mr. Thompson, we're just getting started. What I've observed so far is merely the baseline. Normal human capabilities enhanced by adrenaline and desperation. I want to see what happens when you're pushed beyond human limitations entirely." He held up the remote, finger hovering over the button. "Tell me, have you ever experienced temporal distortion during high-stress situations? Moments where time seemed to slow down, where you could process information and react faster than physically possible?" I had experienced that, actually. During the worst moments in Afghanistan, when mortars were falling and people were dying around me, time would stretch like taffy, and I'd find myself moving and thinking at impossible speed, or perhaps enhanced sensory perception. The ability to see in absolute darkness, to track by scent alone, to hear sounds from distances that should be beyond human range. All of that too. Things I'd never talked about, never even admitted to myself. "What are you?" I asked. "I'm a researcher, Mr. Thompson, and you're the most fascinating subject I've ever encountered." He pressed the button, and Sarah convulsed as electricity shot through her body. "Stop." I started forward, but he held up his hand. "The next shock will be in 9 minutes and 30 seconds. After that, 8 minutes. The intervals will continue to decrease until either sunrise arrives or Sarah's cardiovascular system fails. I estimate she has perhaps 6 more treatments before the damage becomes irreversible. 6 more shocks. Maybe an hour left if I was lucky. What do you want from me?" I asked desperately. "I want you to transcend your human limitations. I want to see what you become when normal capabilities are no longer sufficient." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" He pulled out a thick folder and opened it. 7 months ago, you found 3 missing children in the North Cascades. The search area covered 40 square miles of wilderness, and the children had been missing for 5 days. Professional search teams had given up, yet you located them in less than 6 hours. He flipped through pages covered with notes and photographs. "Witnesses reported that you seemed to know exactly where to look, as if you could sense their location. You walked directly to their hiding place through terrain that GPS systems couldn't map accurately." "Lucky guess," I muttered, but I remembered that day. I had known where to look, following a certainty that had nothing to do with logic or tracking skills. 2 years ago, you pursued a kidnapper through the Olympic Peninsula during a winter storm. Visibility was near zero, your equipment had failed, yet you followed his trail for 18 miles through conditions that should have been impossible to navigate. He looked up from the folder, eyes bright with intellectual excitement. The kidnapper later told police that he was certain he'd lost you after the first hour. He took multiple evasive measures, changed direction repeatedly, even doubled back on his own trail. Yet you stayed right behind him, as if you could see him through the storm. I remembered that case too. The certainty that I was going in the right direction, even when every rational instinct told me I was lost. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're not entirely human, Mr. Thompson. You're something more, something that evolution has been quietly developing in a very small percentage of the population." He snapped the folder shut and moved closer to Sarah. "And I want to document what happens when that evolutionary advantage is pushed to its absolute limit." Sarah's eyes fluttered open and she looked at me with desperate hope. "Matt?" Her voice was weak, but she was conscious. Don't let this monster." The professor knelt beside her and checked the device readout. Fascinating. Heart rate elevated but stable. Neurological responses within normal parameters. She's proving quite resilient. "Please," Sarah whispered. "Just make it stop." Looking at her lying there, helpless and terrified, something snapped inside me. Not broke, snapped into place, like a piece of machinery finally engaging after years of running idle. The professor was right about one thing. I wasn't entirely human, not anymore. I'd always known I was different, but I'd spent my whole life trying to be normal, trying to fit in, trying to convince myself that my abilities were just good instincts or lucky guesses. But Sarah was going to die if I kept pretending to be something I wasn't. Time to stop pretending. I closed my eyes and let go of every limitation I'd imposed on myself, every rational explanation I'd used to diminish what I could really do. The world exploded into hyper-clear detail. I could smell the professor's excitement, his anticipation, his underlying fear that maybe he'd pushed too far this time. I could hear Sarah's heartbeat, rapid but strong, fighting to stay alive. I could sense the electronic devices scattered through the forest, the cameras he'd set up to record everything, the backup plans he'd prepared. And I could feel something else, a presence in the forest that shouldn't have been there. "Interesting," the professor murmured, watching me. Pupil dilation, altered breathing patterns, muscle tension suggesting enhanced neuromuscular coordination. Yes, this is exactly what I hoped to observe. I opened my eyes and looked at him with vision that could see heat signatures, electromagnetic fields, the tiny micro-expressions that revealed his thoughts. "You made a mistake," I said quietly. "Did I? And what mistake was that?" "You assumed I was the only one." His confidence flickered for the first time all night. "What do you mean?" "The presence I felt earlier, watching us, following us. I thought it was you playing more games, but it wasn't." I gestured toward the tree line behind him. "You're not the only one who's been studying my cases. The FBI has a unit that tracks people like me. Enhanced individuals, evolutionary variants, whatever you want to call them. They've been watching me for months." The professor spun around, suddenly alert. "That's impossible. I monitored all law enforcement communications. There's been no federal involvement." "They don't use normal communications," I interrupted. "They don't need to. Not when their tracker is like me." A figure stepped out of the forest shadows, a woman in tactical gear, moving with the same enhanced awareness I'd just embraced. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI Paranormal Investigations Unit. I'd never met her, but I could sense her abilities, her training, her absolute dedication to stopping people like the professor. "Dr. Marcus Kellerman," she said conversationally, weapon trained on the professor. "Formerly of the University of Washington Psychology Department. Dismissed for conducting unauthorized experiments on human subjects. Currently wanted in connection with 17 missing persons across 4 states. 17. Jesus Christ. How did you find us?" The professor, Kellerman asked, but I could hear the defeat in his voice. "Same way Matt found you," Agent Torres replied. "We tracked your electronic signature, followed your scent trail, and then let our enhanced team member guide us to your location." She nodded toward me. "Impressive work, by the way. Took you less time than we expected to accept what you really are." Kellerman looked between us, realization dawning. This was a setup. You used me to trigger his abilities, to force him to acknowledge his enhancement. "Not exactly," Torres said. "We've been tracking you for months, waiting for you to make a move on someone we could use as bait. When you targeted Sarah Chen, we saw an opportunity to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, stop you and recruit Matt." "Recruit me for what?" I demanded. "A program that doesn't officially exist. Enhanced individuals working to stop enhanced criminals. People like Kellerman aren't as rare as you might think, and normal law enforcement isn't equipped to handle them." Sarah groaned as another shock hit her, and I remembered that we were still racing against time. "The device," I said urgently. "How do we disable it?" Torres approached Kellerman, weapon still trained on him. "Give me the deactivation code, now." "And if I refuse?" "Then my partner puts a bullet in your head, and we figure out the device ourselves. Your choice." Kellerman looked at Torres, then at me, then at Sarah lying helpless on the ground. For a moment I thought he might actually let her die rather than give up his experiment. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. 7749 Alpha, he said quietly. Torres pulled out a small device that looked like a sophisticated scanner. She ran it over the electronic device on Sarah's back, entered the code, and waited. The blinking light went solid, then dark. "Deactivated," she announced. I knelt beside Sarah and helped her sit up. She was weak, probably dehydrated, definitely traumatized, but alive. "Is it over?" she whispered. "It's over," I promised. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. This case was over, but Torres had been right about one thing. I couldn't pretend to be normal anymore. Not after what I'd experienced tonight. "Matt," Sarah said, looking up at me with confusion. "Your eyes, they're different. They're glowing." I looked at my reflection in the dark water of the pool beside us, and she was right. My pupils were dilated, and there was a faint luminescence that definitely wasn't normal. "Enhancement side effect," Torres explained. "It fades after a few hours. Most of the time." "Most of the time." Great. Torres was securing Kellerman with zip tie restraints designed for enhanced subjects, stronger than normal plastic with electronic monitoring built in. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now? We get Sarah to a hospital, we process Kellerman through our specialized detention system, and we have a very long conversation about your future. My future? Like I said, people like Kellerman aren't rare anymore. The world is changing, Matt. Evolution is accelerating and enhanced individuals are appearing more frequently. We need people like you to help maintain the balance. I looked down at Sarah, then back at Torres. And if I say no? Then you go back to your normal life and we pretend this conversation never happened. But the next time someone like Kellerman targets innocent people, and normal law enforcement can't stop them. She didn't need to finish the thought. I understood. Can I think about it? Of course, but don't think too long. Like I said, the world is changing. The helicopter arrived an hour later, a medical evac team with federal clearances that asked no questions and took no statements. They loaded Sarah onto a stretcher and whisked her away to a trauma center in Seattle. Kellerman was transported separately, in a vehicle I'd never seen before, some kind of mobile containment unit designed specifically for enhanced individuals. Torres gave me a business card before she left. "Call me when you've decided," she said. But Matt, what you did tonight, saving Sarah, accepting what you really are, that took courage. Don't waste that gift. Then she was gone, leaving me alone in the forest as the first light of dawn filtered through the trees. I made my way back to my truck and drove to Seattle, where I spent the next 3 days in the hospital waiting room while Sarah recovered from her ordeal. Her husband David and daughter Emma never left her side, and watching their reunion, seeing that little girl finally getting her mommy back, made every terrifying moment of the chase worthwhile. Sarah didn't remember much about her captivity, which was probably for the best. But she remembered me finding her, remembered my eyes glowing in the darkness, remembered that I'd been something more than human when she needed me most. "I don't understand what happened out there," she told me on her last day in the hospital, "but I know you saved my life. Whatever you are, whatever you've become, thank you." A week later, I called the number on Torres's business card. "I've been expecting your call," she said. "I need to know something first, Kellerman. What's going to happen to him?" "Specialized containment facility. No possibility of parole, no contact with the outside world. He'll be studied, debriefed, and kept away from anyone he could hurt." "Good." I took a deep breath. "I'm in. I thought you might be. Welcome to the program, Matt. We'll be in touch soon." That was 3 months ago. Since then, I've learned that the world is far stranger and more dangerous than I ever imagined. Enhanced individuals are everywhere, most of them harmless, trying to live normal lives. But some, like Kellerman, use their abilities to hurt people. That's where people like me come in. I still take private cases when I can, still help families find their missing loved ones. But now I also work for an organization that doesn't officially exist, tracking enhanced criminals that normal law enforcement can't handle. It's dangerous work, but it's necessary work. And after what happened to Sarah Chen, after seeing what monsters like Kellerman are capable of, I know I can't go back to pretending I'm normal. I'm Matt Thompson, and I'm not entirely human anymore. Maybe I never was, but you know what? I'm okay with that. Because sometimes, when innocent people are in danger and normal just isn't enough, the world needs something more. Something enhanced, something like me. And that little girl, Emma Chen, she's got her mommy back, safe and sound. That makes all the strangeness, all the danger, all the questions about what I'm becoming. That makes it all worthwhile, because in the end, that's what matters most. Bringing people home to the ones who love them. Even if it takes a monster to stop a monster. Even if you have to become something more than human to save the people who matter most. That's my job now. That's who I am. And I wouldn't change a damn thing.